Welcome, Sega fans, to the podcast 3 decades in the making, proving that to be this good, it really does take ages. As Sega's 5th gen planetary named console celebrates its 30th anniversary this year, it's Sega Saturn season here at the Sega Guys. I'm Dan the Mega Driver, joined as ever by my friend and co-host James the Segaholic. James, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, mate. Fantastic. How you guys do?
Yeah, very good, mate, because we, of course, have a special guest. We've got the Lord himself, SEGA Lord X. Mel, how are you doing? How's things going? What have you been up to?
Oh, I'm doing great. Been doing a few gameplay captures for some upcoming videos, but other than that, I've been trying to keep things pretty easy going.
Good stuff. Good to hear it. I must admit, and the thing is, I know this is a Sega podcast, but at the time of recording, you just released your top 10 N64 games,
Yeah.
and that really made me want to play some N64. It's funny how that, especially especially the likes of Lilac Wars and Mario Kart. It's Star Fox 64, but that was a great video. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, thanks, man. I was one of the kids that, even though I was a Sega kid, I really did come to love the Nintendo 64. It was just something different about that. Is every single game felt different on it, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't just the Nintendo magic either. I mean, even the stuff the third parties released, a lot of that stuff felt different. And, you know, it reminded me in a lot of ways of the Saturn, where it just had its own feel, its own personality. The game library just, it was, overall something very different than what you experienced on the PlayStation.
Yeah, completely agree. I was fortunate. I mean, the thing with me, I only owned a Saturn back in the day, but of course, all my friends had PlayStations, and then quite a few of them had N64s. And I'd swap my Sega Saturn for one of their consoles for like a week or a weekend or something.
Right.
And it was great because I got to experience those consoles quite a lot. But the thing was, people always enjoyed the Saturn as well. Because I was the only one really with one, it
Right.
was in quite high demand. Uh, but you had any good pickups or anything recently?
No, not really. I mean, I've kind of gotten to the point where my game collection is what it is. I mean, I don't really game hunt anymore. Every now and then I'll run across a brick and mortar store where I'll find something that's pretty decent. Mostly what I buy nowadays is I'll pick up the indie releases. Like I picked up Rocket Panda not too long ago. I look at stuff like that when I'm looking to buy something new just to support the studios. I try to follow like the Kickstarters and whatnot for the new releases. So usually I'm buying stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, I have toned down the games that I'm buying. The only thing that I've been working on in the last month or that's bought is an expanded hard drive for my original Xbox. And that's been a journey because I was reading all these guides and there's only certain hard drives that are compatible, and then you have to have certain cables, and then the whole migration process is a pain, and you have to do the key. But yesterday I finally got to the point where it was working, and I've been just doing nothing but migrating game copies over to the hard drive ever since, mostly Sega, obviously.
Right.
Um, Glad that I can finally play PSO online because it's got the Insignia uh
Of
on
course,
Xbox
I.
Live server on there as well, which has been pretty cool. What
Right.
about you, James? What have you been up to? What have you picked up in the recent days?
Well, obviously, as you know, I don't have a disk drive in any of my Segas. I'm on ODEs, but Tom Thumb, my good pal who likes to dig into his Japanese auction sites for me. So a couple of wee things that I got. So first of all, Japanese CD of Ignition from Sega Rally. Love that. This is absolutely incredible. Don't know where he's found this, but it's a retail flyer for Sega Rally on Saturn. It's got like kind of breakdowns of the tracks and the kind of very exciting two-player battle, ghost mode, type attack, and a third car. But that there, I believe, when I've done the Google Translate on camera, says something about can you believe you can only experience this on Saturn? So that's pretty cool. And
And on topic.
I know topic. And this, which I've not actually had a chance to try yet, it came about 2 weeks ago. Just been so busy with the baby and stuff. But got the old Dencha de Go controller. Choo choo. It's
So that's gonna.
that's gonna well, that's for the video. That's what that is. But
You really need one of those hobbyist trains hats, mate.
I need to
Do
look for
that.
one of them just to complete the look, while I'm sitting there trying to figure this out. But I've been looking at videos. There's some pretty cool. Obviously, it's PlayStation 1 version, but it's the same layout. Kind of talking you through how to use the kind of speed lever and the brake kind of lever as well. Obviously, if you brake too late at a station, there's a wee animation of a wee lady who falls over and her legs go up in there. To suggest
Oh.
it's like yes, classy. But no, I'm looking forward to kind of getting used to that and digging into that, so that'll be fun. Finishing a crazy taxi video just now as well, which will be well out by the time this releases. But that's my next project, is a bit of denture to go. So I'll need to wait to get used to it, because I think I've said before that we've all got that kind of fear when we do a video that, if you aren't quite nailed on with the gameplay, there's always someone in the comments waiting to tell you how shit you are at the game. So I need to actually get my head around the game first and get some decent gameplay recorded for it. But I'm looking forward to it, because this is all because of Martin Whitehouse. He done that kind of little video on his channel, kind of rarish Saturn games, and then Should They Go came up, and I'm like, oh, I've not seen that game in ages. Then I started looking about on YouTube, and then the controller popped up, and I'm like, a wee kind of video might be fun on that, but I need the controller. So there you go.
Need
Deep
that full
dive.
experience.
Yeah.
Has to be done. So that's my three. But this Sega Rally flyer, I'm really really chuffed with that. I'm gonna get a frame for it, like a double sided clear frame for it, because I've no idea how, like, half the stuff in these Japanese auction sites, how it stays in such good condition. Like, there's not a crease on this. Like, this is like 30 years old, man. It's like as if it's just came off the printer. But amazing.
Superb stuff, mate. Because of course we're all here today to talk about Sega Saturn. Specifically, this is something that you suggested, Mel, was talking about Sega Saturn exclusives. So I thought, the way we'll do this is we'll do kind of go around the houses. One of us will talk about, we'll nominate a game, and the three of us will talk about it, and then we'll go next, and we'll do that for a while. And I think we'll segment it into, we'll clarify whether it's a game that's still exclusive, because there's so many that are still exclusive to the Sega Saturn, and then ones that were exclusive and then came to other consoles later. Before that, it's probably worth just talking about the Sega Saturn's exclusive library. I don't know how much, Mel, you see modern day discourse on video game consoles. Hopefully, it's not much, because the whole Xbox PlayStation thing is just mind numbing. How
Mhm.
insane it is. But when I catch it, you always hear about people saying, oh, they've got these exclusives, they've got these first party bangers. It's all about these first party bangers. And I think if it really was about just first party bangers, these great first party games, Sega always did pretty well in that respect. Now, mm, games on the Sega Saturn might not have had the mass appeal, and obviously we know Sega made a number of mistakes around that. But in terms of the games, in terms of Sega's first party output, I think we can all agree it was pretty phenomenal, right?
Mhm.
Right.
Aye, as you said, look, people in the modern kind of day, when it comes to gaming, they kind of weaponize exclusives. Like, you see the PlayStation fans are up in arms. The fact, like, one of their bangers, that word, I hate that word as well. One of these bangers comes to PC. Like, whenever the rumor comes out that, like, one of their crown jewels is going to go to PC, you see them all losing their minds. It's like utter denial. No, God of War Ragnarok can't be going to PC. It can't. No, it will. All your exclusives will. But
Yes. Spider-Man 2 yesterday.
exactly. But the Saturn had an abundance. Like, Sega's first party output was insane on all its systems. So if that really was the de facto numero uno kind of marker you were looking for that defined a console being successful, and man, Sega would still be flying high making consoles right now, because exclusives is what they did very, very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that, you know, it might just be because the Saturn's library is what it is. Because when you look at the Japanese library, there's 1,000+ games there. There's a lot of games for the Saturn. And it's kind of funny that it's that way because the Saturn didn't sell a lot, but it's got this massive library. So I think a lot of people on social media, YouTube, groups and whatnot, they try to hone in, on a small amount of games that either are easy to play, they're easy to find, they're easy to collect. And, a lot of that stuff tends to be the Sega made stuff. So it gets a lot of this focus, focus, focus. Whereas if you look at the larger library, on a whole, there's a lot of really good games on the Saturn that weren't made by Sega. And, that's probably the hardest thing to tell people. It's like, hey, just because it was a third party game on the Saturn doesn't mean it sucked.
Yeah.
Not every PlayStation port from the Saturn sucked. Not every PC port to the Saturn sucked, and that sort of becomes the narrative. It's like, oh, you only want the exclusive stuff because Sega was the only one that knew how to program for the Saturn. And I mean, it definitely, there were cases of that, but I don't think that that's the right way to, say that, because there are a lot of third party, games on the Saturn that are absolutely fine.
Yeah, there's a bunch of fantastic third-party games, and there's some really, some of the third-party developers really got some amazing stuff out of the Sega Saturn. You look at stuff like Bulk Slash, and how that game looks and the way that it moves, and the fact that you just wouldn't see anything like that on any other console. And it's a
Right.
game that, when we're going to talk about games that were exclusive and that are still exclusive, that's a game that's still exclusive. And that's a game. I wonder if we'll ever see that come to a modern system, because it's got one of those. It's one of those games that's so uniquely Saturn looking. I mean, imagine even if it did one day come over, by someone's crazy enough to say, right, let's remake Bulk Slash for modern systems. It would look completely different. You wouldn't have your digitized 2D mecha there.
Right.
You wouldn't have the kind of the VDP2 backgrounds playing as the floor. So I suppose that's another way to look at it as well. Even those Sega Saturn games that may not any longer be exclusive, they'll still visually be something unique for the Sega Saturn, won't they?
I
Right.
mean, it may well show up one day. I mean, we've had several kind of Sega Saturn tribute releases in recent years, like Cotton 2, Assault Suit Lanos 2 as well, which will probably be two games that may well come up, during the chat naturally anyway. But it would be great to see it remade. But you're right, sometimes a lot of the charm of these games isn't just how they play, but how they look, So Bulk Slash, I think, has got a very stylized look. I mean, that's one of the games I've got in my list. So there you go. But I just, honestly, it's such a good game. And Danthrax and the team did an amazing job on the localization on that. So I'd be quite happy if that just stayed the de facto version of Bulk Slash.
Good stuff. Go on, and Mel. What were you going to say?
Well, I was gonna say, that's the kind of translation that Bulk Slash got. You know, is that not dedication? That is dedication. That is taking a game and saying, "Hey, this game is so good, we are gonna not just translate it, but we're gonna record, our own voiceovers for it and release it for free to the community." Boy, man, you have to love that level of dedication, man. Like that's the reason why you want to be a part of the community. Those people make you want to be a part of the community.
The same
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
Stellar Assault as well. Did the same
Yeah,
thing with that. It's like, and the best thing about the work they did, like sometimes like voiceover work can be like quite cheesy, but they took that shit super serious. It was like
serious.
it
Yes.
was it was incredible. Like the conversations between the pilots and Stellar Assault, there's some really good like little in jokes and humor between the pilots, and they nailed it. Like they just everything about it. It was it whenever you're sucked into the whole kind of feel of playing the game, you don't feel like you're playing a fan translation. It felt legit. Like this was like a
Oh
retail
yeah.
release. It was so good. Like both of them, incredible.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if those games had been localized back in the day, would they have sounded that good? Oh, of
No,
course
absolutely
not.
not.
Absolutely no chance.
Yeah.
No, 90s voice acting left a lot to be desired. I mean,
Yeah, it sure did.
geez, even at the kind of early 2000s as well. Geez, you think about like that was kind of late 90s, early 2000s, like Blue Stinger and House of the Dead 2 on the Dreamcast. Oh,
Oh yeah.
was capturing
Right.
some Blue Stinger for a video recently, and it was painful. I was like, oh man, Jesus, man,
It's like
Right.
the typing of the Dead 2 video that I've got going up, and
that's
you've
hilarious.
got the training mode in that. And I said it sounds like, it's written by some sort of really low budget AI text to speech program. It's like put your fingers on the F and the A keys. And it's just like, oh my God. But you're obviously absolutely right, Mel, because it's one thing to have great exclusives, but for those exclusives and those games to drive such a passion into people and get them to and have them put in that much work and effort and time into making something of that quality really does speak to one, obviously the passion and the talent behind those people, but the game that inspired them to do that as well. It really, it really takes a special game to go into that amount of work, and you do see that across the Sega Saturn community, whether it is Bulk Slash, Stellar Assault SS, or games like the Shining Force 3 trilogy or Dragon Force 2 and all those games and Grandia that have
Right.
all had enormous fan translations. Sometimes, in the case of Grandia, improving upon, the Western translation, you get ones that are, they call them you get translations that are like the unworking designs version and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, you're absolutely right. If they did this back in the day, it would absolutely not have looked like this or sounded like it.
Oh
And
no
yeah,
way.
it absolutely speaks to the quality of these games and that they inspire people to that level.
Yeah.
Yep, totally, totally.
So speaking of exclusives, then I think what we'll do is, as I say, we'll go around, nominate a game, and we'll discuss it between us. What makes it special, and why it's still such a great exclusive. And Mel, obviously you're the guest, so we'll come to you first. What's your first Sega Saturn exclusive you'd like to talk about? And is it still exclusive, or was it one that was exclusive?
It is still exclusive, and I want to bring forth a stall. And the reason why I love this game is it's really the first game I played on the Saturn that showed undeniably that this console really did have the two-dimensional power that everyone had been talking about in the lead up to the Japanese release of the hardware. Because everybody was saying, "Oh, it's more a 2D system. It's more powerful at 2D. Is this a worry? Is Sega doing it right?" And blah blah blah. And of course, when the system comes out in Japan, you don't really get anything initially that proves that to you, do you? There's Virtua Fighter, there's Tama, there's, eventually you had the Gale Racer port come out. I mean, you're not really seeing, and even though Gale Racer was 2D sprites coming at the screen, it really isn't the same thing as a pure side scrolling 2D game. You know what I mean? And we would have to wait a little while. The system would be out in Japan for a few months before I finally learned a stall had a release date, and I think it came out in like March or April of 95. So, when I imported it, I get it, and it just utterly blew me away from a graphical standpoint. And I thought the sound was awesome too. And it was just one of those games where every stage, every boss fight was introducing some beautiful two-dimensional effect, some beautiful two-dimensional, background doing something, reflections and animations and transparencies. And it really did show you that there was no 16-bit system that was ever going to reproduce those graphics. Like, you can say what you want, Could the Neo Geo have even done a stall 1-to-1? I'm not so sure it could have, which means it was really the first game that sort of popped up that really did show you the Saturn. Hey, man, this system's got the chops to put out some really special two-dimensional visuals. And I understand a lot of people that say, oh, the gameplay wasn't that deep. And it really wasn't. I mean, let's be real. What could a stall do? He could sick the bird on you. He could bash you with his hands. He could hit the ground and stun you. He could blow you across the screen. A stall didn't have a lot of moves that really differentiated the gameplay from something you would have played on the Genesis or Super Nintendo. But everything else in that game was about style, and just the artistic flair of that game was so perfect. And where can you play it? It's still a Sega Saturn game. You can't play it anywhere else. And I'm sure on modern hardware, of course, they could replicate it perfectly. But hey, at the end of the day, the Saturn is still the only place to play it.
I think one of the biggest crimes is that it never actually came out over here in Europe.
That's right.
Madness.
Because it kind of completely passed me by back in the day. And it was recently, I was looking for a review for another game. Excuse me. I was looking for a review of another game, and I came across an old copy of Mean Machine Sega, which was a magazine here in the UK, and it had a style reviewed on import, and it was the Japanese version, and they lambasted it. They gave it like 56% or something like that. And I was just like, oh, come on, man. And that's obviously why after probably one of the reasons why it never came over here, which is a real shame. Because I didn't actually get to play it until, probably after seeing your videos, Mel. It was kind of one of the inspirations for me finally getting down and sitting down to playing it. It really is an extremely special game. And it shows off its graphical chops kind of straight away. When you're walking along through that intro bit, you free the bird, and then you pick up the tree, you got this huge sprite that pops up, and the camera zooms out, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And I completely agree about the sound as well. It's just a beautifully designed game. I think the irony is that if it got reviewed kind of in the modern day as like an indie title, people will be loving it. I think that probably one of the things that, when I'd imagine if you're a reviewer back in the day and you just want, glitzy 3D, you probably don't have time to sit down and really appreciate but this game was kind of like an art piece. It's so lovingly drawn, so well detailed. I love the art style of it. And then from start to finish, yeah, it's not the deepest game, but it's an absolutely wonderful experience.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on it, James?
I think what you said, they're spot on. If it was an indie title today, it would be waxed lyrical over. You know what it was like back then? It was like anything that was 3D, even if it was remotely average or even borderline shit.
To Shinden.
I was going to say to Shinden. The whole move to polygons and 3D kind of gaming, it mesmerized a lot of the gaming media, and it instantly made anything that was 2D. It was old hat. They weren't interested in it. That's how people say like Sega should have made like a proper Sonic 4 on the Saturn. Well, yes, they should have. It would have been shit on by worldwide gaming media as being old, and we need to move on. And it's great to see that 2D, pixel art games are so respected again in the kind of the modern day. We've went completely full circle, on that. But it's a very stylized, as you say, beautifully drawn. The animation, like just like Stall's little swagger, brilliant. And even we talked about voice acting, but Stall's voice acting's not bad. Whenever he frees the bird at the start, he's like, "Go away, you stupid bird!" No, it's like there's a lot of character to it. Why it didn't get a European release is bizarre. It was fully localized, obviously coming out in the US. It would not have been difficult, but was Sega's decision in Europe based on perhaps media perceptions, rumblings they were getting that 3D's where it had to go? 2D was not welcome. It's the only kind of 2D games I remember getting any kind of real respect back in the day was like the Capcom 2D games, like the Street Fighter Alpha games. They got like a lot of praise, but anything that tried to kind of hark back to kind of old school 16-bit kind of gaming, and obviously Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter is, I guess, back to 16-bit, but Street Fighter. But anything that tried to kind of have those old style gaming mechanics, it was just shat on. But I still, again, like you said, Dan, like it was pretty much through Mel's channel and obviously getting the Fenrir and stuff like that in my Saturn when I was reunited with it, that I finally got to try a stall. You know, like the jingle at the start of Mel's channel is like the jingle from the start of a stall, you know. So it's like and the funny thing is obviously like I played a stall and then that connection was made. I've been watching Mel for longer than I'd actually played a stall. So like a stall loaded up and I'm like, SEGA Lord X's music. It's like
Yeah.
so but it's a beautiful, beautiful game. And yeah, the gameplay might not be the most engaging in terms of, you know, depth and, you know, controls and things, but sometimes you just want to go back and have that kind of nice old style kind of classic gaming experience. And whenever you marry that with the visuals and the sound design that Astol's got, it's definitely worth playing today.
I agree.
Is that one that you played on US or Japan, Mel, back in the
Oh,
day?
I imported it as soon as it came out in Japan. When I was really lucky back then because I had two friends of mine imported the Saturn not long after I did. So there were three of us initially that had Japanese Sega Saturns. And so when Japanese games finally began to come out, it was just a rotating door. They would get one, I'd get one. We'd trade them back and forth between one another. The next bunch of games would come out, we'd grab those. There was a period of time where I missed very little in the import scene for the Saturn. And I feel so blessed for that because, man, I got to play a lot of good stuff literally just days after it was released in Japan because I had to mail order everything. So, of course, it took a few days for me to get it. But outside of that, you know, I'm like getting these Japanese games almost as they're coming out. And it's just like, this is one of the reasons why I never looked down on the Saturn or worried about the Saturn or felt like the Saturn was failing because I was just being constantly fed all of these fantastic Japanese games. It's like everybody's talking about, oh, this is better, that's better. You know, the PlayStation crushes the Saturn. I'm sitting there like, dude, I've got way more than I can play. I'm doing just fine.
That's the thing, your perception of Saturn as well, because of that import scene and being so on top of it. Like, and it does happen. Like, my perception and Dan will be the same although Dreamcast did do it anywhere near as well in Japan, but like, we don't pay attention to the Western markets. Like I did that video on the European launch, but like for us, we were so tuned into the Japanese market that like we didn't pay attention to like anything that was happening over here. So you'll have been the exact same, you know, with the Saturn, that you're seeing all this negativity in Western media, and you're sitting going, you're talking about the same machine that I've got. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just didn't match up.
Right, exactly. It was kind of one of those deals where, too, like when things really got going, you know, I'd say end of 95, early 96, when Sega is finally on a roll. You know, they've done dropped Virtua Cop, Sega Rally, Virtua Fighter 2. The following months, Capcom begins spitting out just game after game after game of fantastic CPS and CPS2 arcade ports. And it's just like, then you have all the other stuff that was coming out for the Saturn. I was having trouble keeping up playing it all. And on top of that, I'm trying to mix in stuff that's coming out for the PlayStation. You know, I'm trying to stay on top of that, which I mean, as much as I played on the Saturn, you have to understand I could not import anywhere near the level on the PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I was missing a ton of stuff on the PlayStation at that time. And it didn't matter because the Saturn felt like it was giving me everything I needed, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think that's what we all try to get across to people. Is, and people say that obviously we know commercially that the Saturn wasn't a success, but being there in the moment, we weren't hurting for games. We weren't hurting for good games. We had our hands full with titles to play. There's never a time, and yeah, it's similar to you, Mel, in that I was lucky that I had friends that would trade with me, and then those friends, some of those got Sega Saturns, and then later on in the life, especially when we were importing as the kind of the Western releases that tailed off, we were getting the imported games. That's how I managed to get play Shining Force 3 and Panzer Dragoon Saga, even though they were like a week apart. One friend got one, I got another, and then we traded later.
Right.
And it was the same when with like the 4 MB games that came over in Japan. We were doing that sort of thing, and we were never really. There was never a point where you're scratching around thinking, "Oh, I wish there was some games for this Sega Saturn." They were always there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the worst thing someone can say to me when they send me a message as SEGA Lord X. It's like, I feel sorry for you that that's all you played. And I'm just sitting there like, buddy, that was the best time of my life, man. You really shouldn't feel sorry for me. I had more than my fair share to play.
Exactly.
Oh man.
Oh, and talking about some more of these outstanding games, we'll come to you next, then, James. So what's the first exclusive that you want to talk about?
So it kind of follows on quite nicely from that conversation about, friends and swapping games and things like that, because the game I'm going to put up for discussion is no longer exclusive. It has had a PlayStation 2 release on the old SEGAGuys label, but this is a game that me and my good friend Sam used to play so much. He owned it, I didn't. It's called Decathlete in the US and Japan, but I will forever know it as Athlete Kings. What an absolutely brilliant game. Runs on the STV board, obviously the arcade hardware based on the Sega Saturn, but just a ton of fun. So many wacky events, so many incredibly crazy characters. That kind of old school rattle the button kind of gameplay. If you had a Spectrum and you had, Decathlete, was it Daley Thompson's Decathlete on there? You were used to rattle
Yeah,
that but that space bar to build up the energy meter.
that game broke joysticks, mate.
Oh
That
mate, it
game,
did.
in the Commodore 64, you had to shake the joystick from left to right, and I went through about 4 joysticks.
Oh, but I mean, I used to set the controls. I used to have XYZ as action and ABC as your power buttons. So I just used to literally sit there with the three fingers on like, just rattling that speed bar up. Sometimes you would be that focused on get the speed up that you would run past the marker. Like on the high jump or the long jump, you were miles past your marker before you hit the action button. But oh, so many great memories of playing that game. Sam and I had so many laughs playing it. My favorite event, I loved the javelin. Just so good. Javelin and shot put are such fun. But you can still hear the sound effects and like often the shot put, your wee guy stands in, you've got to kind of time it and the green bars and sometimes it'll go halfway up and sometimes it'll go all the way and you've got to try and get that action button for as much power as you can. But you know, the kind of the 500 meters as well. You've got to pace yourself because if you run too fast, your wee guys, you start running out of steam and staggering about the track. Oh, but it's just such a brilliant multiplayer game. Good fun if you play it, solo as well. But it really comes into its own whenever you've got friends to play it with. And Sam and I played that, so many times. He brought it up to mind pretty much every time we came up, and we had such a blast with it. So I think it's pretty much still synonymous with the Saturn, even though it's got that PlayStation 2 release in Japan. But oh, what a game! Absolutely love it.
Yeah, great shout, mate. It's actually one that I've got on my list. I've got Athlete King slash Winter Heat
Mhm.
because I think you can't. In my head, they're both peas in the pod. And obviously
Yeah,
the Sega Ages collection has those two alongside. I think it's got all three, hasn't it? It's got Athlete King's Winter Heat and
The
Virtua
Dreamcast
Athlete
one.
2K. Yeah,
Yeah.
Virtua Athlete 2K. I love what you were saying then about the way that you set your buttons up. Back when I was in sixth form doing my A levels, I we had obviously free periods at school, and I brought my Dreamcast in, and I had a Virtua Athlete 2K, and that game is responsible for people missing some of their lessons. People were doing all sorts of things to try and like, people put rubbing pens over the buttons. People were standing up, and there was all these techniques, but a lot of that came from Athlete Kings. And I think I mentioned earlier about how I lend people my Sega Saturn, or I'd get their PS2 or N64. And some of those ended up buying Sega Saturns as a result. And Athlete Kings is one of the games that pushed people to buy a Sega Saturn. And when Winter Heat came out after, that was a game that, we were still playing that game when we were coming back from the pub in like 2006. I'd still have the Sega Saturn set up in my room. And it would be like, right, let's get the Saturn multi-tap out. Let's do a four-player Winter Heat after we've had a load of beers and stuff. It was that good. And the thing with Athlete Kings, and less so with Winter Heat, is Athlete Kings is such a gorgeous looking game.
Yeah.
You know, when you put that game on back in the day when we had like the widescreen TV in the living room, we plugged that in via RGB SCART, and it looked absolutely gorgeous. It's one of those games that I thought was, almost on a par with Virtua Fighter 2. Especially, I think when I think it's like the pole vault or the high jump, where kind of the camera pans out and you see the
Aye.
stadium, and it's bathed in that kind of sunset glow. You've got
That's
that
right.
orange sky, and it just pans out, and you hear the crowd and everything. It's just an absolutely gorgeous looking game. And, with a few friends and stuff, it's almost peerless. The comparison would have been with, I suppose, with Konami's Track and Field, which is okay, but just I never found it quite as fun, or had as much character as Athlete Kings. It's just a shame Athlete Kings didn't have the four-player mode, because that would have really just cemented it as the best of its kind. But even with two players and everyone taking turns, it's absolutely phenomenal. How about yourself, Mel? What are your memories with that one?
Oh man. I think a story will best describe how I feel about that one. When that game came out, me and my buddy Nate, we were immediately interested in it because we knew from reading Game Fan magazine it ran in the Saturn's high resolution mode like Virtua Fighter 2. We both had enjoyed similar games like that. We loved wrestling games. We loved Konami's Track and Field, basically other button mashers, that were competitive multiplayer. So we both knew we were going to be interested in it. So it comes out for the Saturn, and we're roommates at this time, right? So he's got his Saturn in his room, and I have my Saturn in the living room. And I had gone through and meticulously played this sucker to get these world records and have my name all throughout the records. Back then I just put MEL, MEL, MEL. Everything's MEL. I done kicked everybody's ass. So one night I go to work, and he's off. He's at home. And I come home, and I'm gonna be like, yeah, I'm gonna play me some, decathlete. And I sit down, and it's playing, and the demo is running, and I go to sit down, and I'm sitting there looking at my television, and the fucking demo is showing NAT, NAT, NAT. This asshole had come and cut my system on, sit there the whole fucking night, and replaced all of my records, man.
Oh, Jesus.
So I'm like, what in the flying hell is going on here? And he just thought this was the funniest thing in the world. So for days, and let me tell you, man, he destroyed some of my records. And I couldn't figure it out because I don't think I was bad at the game. How was he able to do this? What the hell? So after a few days, I was able to get back about half of my records, but I was never able to get rid of his name completely off of the list because he had done so well. Come to find out, this cheating little asshole had found a way to tape a popsicle stick to the Saturn controller where he was holding it, and with resistance, it was like he was able to manipulate it where it could go really fast, across the buttons. And man, oh, I hated him for that. But moral of the story is I love that game so much. I sat there until I got all of my records back eventually. I didn't want to just erase it from memory and start over. This guy had come in and basically punked me, and I had to do the right thing. That's how awesome Decathlete was, man. It was one of those games that gripped you. It was competitive as hell. It was so easy to pick up and play. And a lot of people would just call it a button masher. Oh, that's so simple. There's no skill involved. Dude, that's a load of horse shit. That game took some serious skill, man. Like, your timing could be on point and you could get a score or a distance or whatever where it was next to impossible to beat unless you were that much better. There was definitely a load of skill involved. And once, by the time you factor in those high resolution visuals, the appeal of the characters themselves, man, that's quintessential Sega there, isn't it? Such a simple concept. Other companies have done it and then some, yet Sega comes along, adds something to it that just makes it special. And that's what was so awesome about the Saturn.
Yeah.
What a story, Mel. I'm in tears here, man. That was so good. Like, as if the story about Nate actually going and stealing your records wasn't, bad enough, but the fact that he stuck a popsicle stick onto the controller. Oh, jeez. Oh, it's so good. What a game. Honestly, what a game.
But the thing is, the best thing about that game, and I don't have anything quite as extreme as that, but I've got so many memories of us being sat around someone's house playing that game. And I remember someone got something like, it was something obscene in the javelin. It was over 100-meter throw because it's like you say now, that top ceiling of skill it's so tight. And
Yeah.
they blitzed everyone, the world record and everyone else by about 10 to 15 meters. It was, the throw was that. It was like, how did you do that? And everyone is playing this game over and over and over again just to try and get close to this world record. And people were
Right.
getting so competitive and quite irritable about it because it's like you're saying, you don't want to just delete it. You don't delete those records. Your pride, your gaming pride is at stake there.
Oh,
You
absolutely.
can't.
Your manhood has been challenged.
Exactly.
And that's the thing, also because Sam brought his copy to mine, and then I would go in and play it at his when I went to his house. So like we had like each other's names on each other's Saturns. So like even when, as you say, whenever you weren't, you were still competing against each other on each other's system, whenever you played it together. So it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, such a fun game. And those visuals as well, like you said, like Dan, you mentioned the kind of the sunset and the kind of the open kind of arenas. But the game does such a great job. Like Sega were almost, I think, showing off because you get 3 runs obviously at every event, and with each run, the camera changes for your starting position. So it's like there's a horizon in that distance. Let's now show you the stadium over here on that. It's like they were almost kind of showing off how good it looked as well, which is it's a stunning looking game.
And it ran at 60 frames per
It did.
second.
Yep.
So
Yep.
so it was super smooth on top of it.
Oh, it's gorgeous game and so much fun. But that timing thing as well, it's like, as you said, people put it down as a button masher, but there's a skill involved in getting up to top speed and timing, not just pressing the button, but holding it down long enough and then releasing it, because obviously there's an optimal angle for each event to get the maximum distance. But in talking about it, there'll be people listening to this going, "Well, that doesn't sound hard. Try it and see how hard that is." It
Yeah.
ain't easy.
Absolutely. Oh, what a great shout, mate. Uh, so back to me for this one. So I think the first game that I'm going to talk about is Panzer Dragoon 2. No, obviously, as the title says, Panzer Dragoon 2 2, which is 2-2 if you're German. But this is a game that, at the time of recording, is still exclusive to the Sega Saturn. The remake, I don't think we've heard anything for about 6 years. I think maybe some murmurs that it is still in progress. But as a game for the Sega Saturn, this was my actual introduction to the series. I kind of watched it from afar because I didn't get my Sega Saturn until 1996. I'd seen the first game on like Cybernet TV shows, Games Master, Bad Influence and stuff. And I'd seen a rolling demo, and at the time it was like, that's amazing. But I couldn't afford a Sega Saturn at the time. And when I finally got my Sega Saturn, came with Sega Flash Volume 1, which had the episode 3 demo on there. And the minute I played that, I was like, I have to have this game. It's just a game that I've spent so much time with over the last 30 years. And it's just so unique as far as rail shooters concerned, and just as an experience. Playing through it over and over again recently for another project, you really get a feel of how your playthroughs can be quite different. You've obviously got the multiple routes, which at a surface level, yeah, you're getting different ways to play each level. But there's these tiny little behaviors, like the way that if you kill certain bosses a certain way, if you absolutely maim the stage 3 boss, for example, like rather than kind of bleeding out and crawling towards you, he kind of just explodes. And there's certain different ways that you can fight the final boss as well. So as an experience, for me, it's one of those ones that's just kind of unique to the Sega Saturn. There's nothing else quite like it anywhere else. And you take on top of that the fact that as a cinematic game, it was pretty far ahead of its time, you know. Like the first game, there wasn't too many games out there at the time that were fully voiced with in-game cinematics that had an overarching story. And it was told in such a way that, you really felt invested in the two characters. You've got Lundy, who's the Dragon Rider, you've got Lagi, who's the mutant coolia who turns into the dragon. So I was invested from a story perspective. Visually, it's absolutely stunning. Some of the best use of kind of VDP2. It runs at a solid frame rate compared to the first game. Runs in full widescreen as well, which I forgot about until after I'd captured my footage. So it's all in it's all in 4x3. And then the soundtrack, even though it's not Red Book audio like the first game is, it's still absolutely phenomenal. And while, if you're being nitpicky, you could say that the instrumentation isn't as good as the first game. The actual arrangements, I think, are as good, if not better. So when you bring all of that together, you get this really magical experience that gives you so many amazing moments. And my favorite of which being, in stage 2, you've spent the first episode on the ground and you jump up and then you get taken out of the sky and then you're caught into this big battle between the Empire and the Mechania. And then you jump off the cliff and all of a sudden the music just slows down. And then I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And I only played this game the other day. And it kind of fades out. And then like it kind of like fades away with like this jingle. And then all you can hear is the flight of Lagi's wings. And it's just such a magical moment. And it's just it's such a special game. And it's everything about it is just so finely tuned. And what I know about it is that it was developed by a very small team of people. Obviously, Team Andromeda split into two teams for SEGA and Saga. And the SEGA team were kind of small, very close knit, all worked on the first game together. And you really get that is the game that they wanted to make. And it's absolutely, there's so much depth to it as well. It's just absolutely beautiful. And I think it's a game that just succeeds on all levels. And it's another one of those games that I think in my mind is just so quintessentially Saturn. So yeah, Panzer Zwei is my shout. What's your thoughts and experience with this one, Mel?
You know, Panzer 2 is one of those games where it was one of the first three-dimensional engines that I really felt conveyed a sense of scale in the environments you were in. It's like, how when the canyon stage opens up and it's sort of this camera looking at the high ups of the canyon, and it's sort of scaling around before the camera comes down and centers into you. It's kind of letting you know that you're in this big, big, like, canyon run. And then it starts. And then, like you say, you get to this point where you jump off and you felt like you were up high, didn't you? It was like, wow, like that's really well done. Like the way you jumped off, they were able to do that with just a few polygons as you were coming to the edge of that cliff, and basically just a VDP2 layer for the ground that you slowly descended towards. And they were able to give you this sense of flight and this sense of falling. How many games had really accomplished something like that back then? And then, the rest of that stage, you're in there, you're battling these towers that are way up at the top of these canyons. They seem so far away. It takes forever for their little missiles and homing things to come towards you. And then you got to the stages like the battleship, and you've got this sea of clouds, and you've got the ship sort of, and the ship's name escapes me, but
the shell cove.
There you go. And you're in and out of this thing, and then when you come out, it's like, wow, this thing is way bigger than you thought it was. And the clouds are all around you, and then you go back into it, and it's like you're fighting, you're blowing off pieces of it outside, and then you're back inside of it, and it's like it felt almost like a Star Wars scenario. And it just conveyed the sense of scale. It conveyed an environment that, really made you feel small and made you feel insignificant. And it made you feel like this is the battle you're in. Odds are against you. You're in a story where, this dragon and its rider are up against what seems like insurmountable odds, and I don't know. It's just something about that game gripped you with how it was designed, the art, the perspective, the scale. And then, of course, you mix in everything else with the visuals. It was one of, at the time, the best looking Saturn games that I think was out. And like you say, you used VDP2 to a certain extent that really let the Saturn just paint a bunch of stuff in the environment that came off so impressive. And then, like, when you fought that boss that was in the that would go underneath of water and bust out the thing you were standing on, and you could see him through the water circling you. That was a three-dimensional engine, but Sega did it in such a way with how it rendered where it looked perfectly translucent, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was absolutely gorgeous. And then when it blows up, these rays of light are shooting out of it, and it's like every animation, every effect, everything that was like conveyed to you was almost like somebody was showing you game development at an artistic level. Where else did you see something like that back then? Was there anything like that on the PlayStation that early in its life? I mean, come on. I mean, that game was beautiful. It was a technical showpiece. Special effects showed the Saturn, could really put out some pretty visuals. Add in the story, add in the gameplay, add in the challenge, add in the multiple paths, add in the, evolution of the dragon. I mean, it's one of the best games on the system, isn't it?
In my eyes, it's one of the best games of the whole generation. I don't think there's anything quite like it anywhere else. I'm a huge Star Fox 64 fan, but I think Panzer SEGA absolutely clears it because it's just so replayable, and it's for all those reasons, Mel. And I don't think there's anything quite like the spectacle of that siege on the Shellcoof in Episode 6, where you are. It is like a Star Wars film because you're attacking the surface, then you go inside, and you're inside and outside. And I remember, you know, my first thoughts as a kid were like, how have they rendered this entire ship? And of course, it's not. But you really get the sense that it is, that
Right.
you are dipping in and out this entire gigantic structure.
Right.
And then you get to the boss at the end, and it's just like this. It's just such an epic battle with an astounding soundtrack. Yeah, one of the best games of its era. James, what about your thoughts on this?
I think what Panzer's Vi done well, the first game, obviously from the outset, you're kind of getting that intro where the scene is pretty set quite quickly. The rider gets killed, transfers all these knowledge over, and then you just gain this monster that's fully powerful, ready to go. And Zwei, made you kind of, and I think if you came from the first game, it was quite jarring at first. Like, cause if you'd played the first game and you were used to that, you were used to, from the off, you're starting with this big, powerful beast at homing lasers and big wingspan and just looked intimidating. And then you were starting off with this little kind of baby dragon that, and the story set, quite nicely, obviously, it's banned in their village. These mutants are meant to be killed, and, they go against the grain and kind of hide it away and make it their own kind of pet. And over the levels, it evolves and gains it pretty similar in a way, I suppose, to Panzer Dragoon Saga, where you can morph the dragon skills as you level up. You see it kind of maturing. But it's the scale of it, as you said, is phenomenal. I mean, when we were talking about the music, the way it fades as you you jump off that cliff, I could hear it as you were talking about it. It's quite similar to in Panzer Dragoon, the original game, before you fight the kind of the first kind of dragon boss on the desert stage after the worms. You've got that kind of beautiful orchestral score. You take out the worms and they're screaming as you take them out, and then the music builds up and builds up, and then as the storm kind of just starts to appear, the tornadoes in the desert, the music just fades, and all you hear is the wind swirling, and then you get the lasers fire over the top of you, and then this dragon appears and you fight it. Quite kind of similar to that. But it's in terms of sheer scale, it's incredible what it does. I don't think there's any other game on the system, I think, that shows off the sheer power of the system in terms of what it can do. Like VDP2 absolutely sings on that game. Like the draw distance just never ends, which, getting back to what we said when we spoke to John Linneman about, VDP2 and the secret sauce, as he calls it, of the Saturn, that, VDP2 could draw an infinite 2D plane of, it was 4096 by 4096 pixels, which John, doing his maths on the spot kind of thing, worked out that at 240p, it works out at 15 screens worth of distance. Like that's some draw distance. That's you weren't seeing anything popping in terms of environments. That sprawling, sky and the skyline, the clouds and everything was just phenomenal. But yeah, and what Mel, you said about the sense of height, that again, it's such a simple effect, but on that level where you kind of jump off the cliff and you're kind of caught amongst that battle, there's the kind of mountain peaks that are kind of coming through the clouds, and it just conveys, as you said, how small you and your dragon is at that point in time, but just how high up you are. This grand battle's taking place, and that's mountain peaks that are coming through the clouds, and it's just it's a beautiful game. I mean, maybe a hot take, I still prefer the first game. I think just because, like, I remember getting the demo disc through. My uncle had also registered his Saturn, so they sent through that kind of early demo disc of it as well, and getting to play that kind of desert stage, stage 2. But I just think that both games are just absolutely stunning. But I think as a sheer technical showpiece, I think Panzer's Vi it stands near enough at the top of the tree, when it comes to showing what the Saturn can do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think probably part of the issues that they're having in kind of remaking it for modern systems is conveying that sense of scale without compromising the art style, which, they turned that game around in less than a year. with a few textures, and we're able to manage the artistic feats that they did, which is absolutely phenomenal. But there we go. So we'll come back down to you, Mel. What's the next Sega Saturn exclusive you'd like to nominate for us to discuss?
Well, since my Panzer II choice was, stolen, I'll go ahead and move on to my next one. This one is still exclusive, unfortunately, but my next is Fighters Mega Mix. And this is one that to this day I am still really in disbelief that Sega didn't do more with it. Like, why was this game not, serialized on the Dreamcast? Why was there never an arcade version? Why didn't it become sort of a almost a Smash Brothers like update every generation? Sega had something special with this game, and they kind of took gameplay from Virtua Fighter 2. They took it a little bit from Virtua Fighter 3. They took a little bit from Fighting Vipers. They took a little bit from Sonic the Fighters, even. I mean, they took all these little pieces and these characters and these themes, and they just melded it into this fighting game that was unbelievably fun. It was so easy to get into, and it wasn't as strict as, say, something like Virtua Fighter, the series itself, but it wasn't quite as loose as, say, something like Fighting Vipers. So it existed in this middle ground that was, it was really approachable, and it was fun. It had fun characters. Where the hell else were you going to fight with a blow up bear against a car that could punch you with its wheels? I mean, it's one of those games where it didn't take itself seriously, but it was really fun, and it was kind of the evolution of that Fighting Vipers engine. So it also ran really well, and it looked the best that particular engine really looked out of that, between those games. And I don't know, Fighting Vipers is one of those Saturn exclusives that I really think Sega made a massive mistake not maturing that, adding to it, bringing it to newer systems, really letting that Sega fun, that Sega brand sing. Just introduce every time it was updated for a new console, they could introduce new characters to it from the Sega universe and just play with it, have fun with it, grow it, make it feel like something that you wanted. It would never have reached the height of something like Street Fighter or anything like that, but it really didn't need to, did it? It was its own thing. And I don't know, man. I go back to that game quite a bit. So it was also one of those games that Sega made that was really a true console game, wasn't it? So much to unlock, so much to experience, hidden stuff. I mean, it was really the exact opposite of the Sega arcade ports, where a lot of those would come in with very little added to the baseline content. So, it was something special on the Saturn, and Sega just didn't do nothing with it. And I love that game. I really think it's one of the Saturn's best fighting games.
Oh,
Totally agree.
it should have been we've spoken so many times about what Fighters Mega Mix could and should have been. I mean, even if you're talking about moving on to the Dreamcast, like bring over the last Bronx guys, you know, and you come into the modern day. Can you imagine? Like, everyone wants to know, like, who would win out of Kiryu and Ryu Hazuki. Well, let's have them fight each other, and have Landy in there. There's the fact that Sega have expanded the Yakuza and Shenmue kind of lore so much. Even those two games alone, then you add in, like, as we say, like Last Bronx. You think of how many characters that the selection screen would probably dwarf Marvel versus Capcom 2 with all its characters unlocked. There's so much potential. And as you said, like the bringing in of the VF3 move set, bringing in the dodge button from VF3, even the character designs are from VF3. And again, you can the paths you can choose. If you can have the Virtua Fighter path, the Fighting Vipers path, the mixed path, and when the Virtua Fighters fight each other, it zooms right in, and the fighters are huge. And then if you're fighting a Fighting Vipers one, it zooms away back, and you get the cage and all that. And it's just how they managed to merge it all into one, as you say. So much to choose from. The unlockables, Janet from Virtua Cop 2, Daytona car. Was it Kuma Chan and Panda Chan? That are in there as well. There's just the palm tree, Pepsi Man in the Japanese version. Pepsi Man. So it's so good. And I think Fighters Megamix, I think, gets a bit of unfair kind of criticism at times because of how it looks. I think some people say that it looks rough, but it was never going to run in a high resolution mode because it had to accommodate the Fighting Vipers guys and obviously the 3D kind of ring. But even Fighting Vipers again, people shit on that sometimes, but they overlook the absolutely incredible lighting engine that's in that. Like Sega had to make a decision: do we go high resolution mode, or do we bring over the lighting system from the arcade? And I think the decision to bring the lighting system over was absolutely the right one. But yeah, Fighters Megamix is just so much content. Like at a time when Sega were criticised for their arcade ports being so bare bones, people were talking about like Tekken 3, how it had all these extra game modes as well, and it was so fleshed out. But Fighters Megamix had just so much to unlock on there. It was like a kind of an advent, a Sega advent calendar for a fighting game. It was just, and like you said, why they didn't expand on it. Like, it's probably the one franchise that would have been the easiest to carry on. It's probably the most criminal that they haven't, because they've just got so many characters to choose from. Like, put the Jet Set Radio guys in there. Let them kick the shit out of each other. It's endless. There's just so many characters from so many franchises over the years.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, the thing is with Fighters Megamix, the only reason I think that they didn't push it on maybe is because, you hear it with Eternal Champions as well, is that Sega didn't want to harm the Virtua Fighter franchise. And I suppose there might have been a perception that if you've got Virtua Fighter with all these other characters, it kind of, you don't need to play Virtua Fighter, but that's not true. Because Virtua Fighter, by comparison, is this very finely tuned, very well balanced fighting series. Like every single game is so meticulously balanced. It's art how well the games are balanced. Fighters Megamix, on the other hand, is just pure fun. It's not about the balance. Once you unlock Janet from Virtua Cop, you do the back forward B and C. You can fire off those, and then unless you get your dodges down, you're going to lose. I mean, that game is not a balanced fighting game, and that's fine, because I was thinking, you know, two of the biggest fighting games out there at the moment aren't balanced fighting games. I mean, yeah, but Street Fighter 6 was successful, Tekken 8 was successful, traditional fighting games. But the two biggest fighting games in the world at the moment are Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is not a balanced game. That is just a pure fun party game, although there is a competitive scene around that. And the other game, which is absolutely huge at the moment, is Dragon Ball Sparking Zero. And that is a game that really isn't balanced. And that kind of goes on kind of law power scaling. My son plays it. And if people weren't afraid of having to make their fighting games balanced, then yeah, the Fighters Megamix really should be like a generational or annual franchise. It should be a Super Smash Brothers. It should be, a Sega All Stars fighting game. We nearly get it with this one, with Bean and Bark from Sonic Fighters. You got Rent a Hero in there. You got Janet from Virtua Cop. You got all these characters. I mean, obviously they're all AM2 franchises. But yeah, I'd love to see, Ryugo Kotaku Studio today just do something, with this franchise, because you're absolutely spot on, Mel. It really should be something like a linchpin for Sega, something that Sega do regularly. It's a crying shame that they don't, because the game itself is absolutely phenomenal. I remember picking it up. I picked it up on release, actually, on the PAL release, and I was absolutely blown away for it. I think, yeah, coming back to what you were saying, James, about, it gets a little bit of stick for the visuals. I think if you play the Virtua Fighter characters against each other in Virtua Fighter mode, then you do see a little bit of a visual downgrade. But then that's countered by the fact that you've got the armor on the Fighting Vipers, you've got the cages on the Fighting Vipers arenas, you've got the lighting effects, not just in the Fighting Viper stages, but you've actually got them restored to things like Sarah's stage as well, and Jackie's stage that actually takes place at sunset.
Mhm.
And there's so much content in there. You've got the fantastic training mode. That training mode is so ahead of its time in the way that it teaches you the moves. Street Fighter wouldn't have anything like that until Street Fighter 4 in 2008. It's phenomenal how far ahead of its time it was, Fighters Megamix. So, yeah, definitely. And it is still exclusive to the Sega Saturn, unless did it come? Was it the Gamecom that got a game called Fighters Megamix? Obviously, it's probably something completely different.
Oh
'Cause it's
man,
going to
that
be
thing,
2D back and right, right?
yeah, that sucked terribly. That's not the same thing.
That's the closest it's got to another release, is that abomination.
Right.
It's like, um, yeah, the fact that it's still exclusive is, you know, on one hand, it's lovely to sing the praise of the Sega Saturn and say, look, these fantastic games are games that you can only get on this console, and this is why we love it, and this is why it's so fantastic, and this is why it deserves more respect. But on the other hand, these games are like in Sega Saturn jail. And, on the other hand, I really wish that Sega would do something with some of these, whether it's sequels, or whether it's remakes or ports, whatever, just to say, look, these games are fantastic, and more people, regardless of what system you're playing on, should be able to play them. And Fire Megamix is 100% one of those games, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I'm not really sure if Sega would go back that far to bring back a series like that, but both of you made great points. Can you imagine with everything that Sega has now, Atlas, all of their properties now? I mean, can you imagine what something like a Sega Mega Mix, like a modern take on that, what it really could be? I mean, Sega has the back catalog to pull characters for this series for the next 20 freaking years. I mean, oh man, talk about a missed opportunity. Hopefully, Sega's management will roll over at some point and we'll get some new blood in there. And they will look at that and go, why haven't we done this? And then it'll happen.
Uh, yeah,
It's,
you
it's
could have like,
criminally underused. Like, it's you just imagine even if they made it like a team fighter, like Marvel versus Capcom 2, you can pick three fighters, like a big tag team battle, Sega Mega Mix. Oh, it'd be incredible.
Oh,
you
yeah.
imagine the teams, you'd have Kiryu, Joker from Persona, and Red from Angry Birds. It's
I
like,
forgot about Rovio. God.
oh, they could
Oh,
go
yeah.
anywhere.
That would be awesome. I'm now just flashing through characters that could pop in. The car from Crazy Taxi, Joe Musashi from Shinobi. I mean, good Lord, man, just the fighting styles alone that a game like that would introduce.
Could you imagine like, if you did like your super move and like the bird from Angry Bird that Red was in there, like your animation, see if your team was like Akira, Ryu, and Red, you could like the animation would be like Akira and Ryu setting up the catapult. Like Akira could set the catapult up, Ryu could grab Red, put him in the elastic band and pull him back. Like we're designing this stuff for you, Sega. Look, we're doing it for free. It's like,
Yeah,
come
it's
on,
free
man.
consultancy, Sega.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, man, what a game! What a game! But I will say, Mel, for what you said about Panzer's Fire, you got me back there. That was on my list as well.
yeah. It's I think we've all done each other because Fighters Mega Mix was my next one.
No pressure then, James, because yours is next. So what's your next choice?
Oh, guys, I've been sitting here. I've got an asterisk beside. Well, it's now two games. Well, no, there's three now. And it's trying to pick. Like they're all ones I want to talk about. This is the thing that's just so many good games. I think in terms of sheer kind of what it means to be kind of game at the time. It's a game which it has had a Windows release, so trying to find a PC to run it today would be quite difficult. The PS2 version of this game is dog shit because it's on a shitty Elite version remaster. So the Saturn remains the best place in the home out with emulating the arcade game to play this. I'm going with Virtua Cop, the original Virtua Cop. Where to start with this one? You know, Panda's documentary unearthed so much information about the development of this game. A rookie team, you know, on their first ever project, supervised now and then by Yu Suzuki popping his head in and, how you doing, guys? Was good. Back out. You know, the tricks that they were learning. You know, I believe it was the first game to use the Sega graphics library as well, one of the first games to use it. So, you know, they were learning on the job. They had a monumental task of porting this game over. The nips and tucks they were doing, like on the third stage, whenever you finish taking out the kind of heavy duty kind of military guys and you head down into the kind of underground car park, the techniques that they use, VDP 1 and 2 working together, you know, manipulating the camera so that you never quite seen where the tucks were made between both layers being used. But as a game, just man, it's one of my early Saturn memories. Also getting that bundle, you know, for Christmas from the bottom shelf on W.H. Smith's game section. You know, it was only out like 2 weeks. It was on the bottom shelf. You know, criminal. You still see that beautiful box to this day with the Virtua Cop sticker on it. You know, the Virtua Gun box. But as a game, you know, takes that kind of old tried and tested Operation Wolf style kind of light gun gameplay, but then brings that whole cinematic flair into it, that whole 90s kind of buddy cop movie, the kind of soundtrack that goes between cheese and drama, you know, just sets the scene beautifully. That the lines from the bosses are just, you know, again, absolute cheese, you know, ha, pretty bold, aren't we? I'll take care of you myself. You know, that just the kind of the reticles, you know, the targeting reticles changing kind of color to indicate whether it was safe or whether you're in danger. Those, just everything about it. Like, I know Virtua Cop 2 has got the kind of branching paths and more texture graphics, but again, for me, just that first game is just etched into my brain, just like that kind of visual style about it. Like it was textured, but not quite fully textured. So it still had a little bit of that kind of the kind of bad guy still had a little bit of that, not flat shaded, but still quite stylized look about them. But the stages were just quite beautifully detailed. You know, just, oh man, I'm like the soundtrack for it as well. As I said, just every stage has its own unique feel, and you know, just the tone about it, different kind of enemies, the little kind of like tricks that you learn with the gameplay, like, you know, learning when to shoot out windows, you know, just wee daft things like you can save time and score higher if you take out the window because you can shoot that guy a bit faster. Like on the second stage, there's a kind of a big yellow crane and there's a little conveyor belt that just goes right behind it. And you know, whenever you come round, you've got a small window. You can take out those windows because there's a guy who's going to come down that conveyor belt and he's going to be waiting to just take you out. You know he's there. You can just take the windows out and pop him before he comes through. But I think, you know, you couple it with the Virtua Gun or the Stunner, as it was obviously called in the US, but just you couple that whole experience together. There was nothing until Time Crisis obviously came home 97 on PS1, but just it was the ultimate light gun experience at home, and it just merged everything. You know, the kind of cinematic sweeping camera, like in the office stage, the third level of the headquarters. It's a beautiful bit after you kind of go through the underground car park, and you know, you score. Somebody comes up and you open a door and you go up through this staircase and you weave through, and it's almost like, you know, your character's almost hugging the wall, kind of looking around, even though it's only a camera that's kind of taking you on this journey. You're not actually moving the character, but you're kind of drawn in. It feels like, you know, you're waiting for what's round the corner, and you come out into that big open foyer, and Die Hard style, the truck trailer crashes through the window and then the doors open and it'll pile out, and it's so good. I just love that game so much. And I just, as I say, out with emulating it on PC, and I know you can get like Sinden light guns now that let you play it on modern systems if you have a PC and you want to emulate it. I'd love someone to actually come up with a solution to get like the Sega, like the Stunner of the Virtua Gun to work on modern TVs. Because obviously, if you get CRT, you're fine, you can play away with it. But I just love them to come up with a solution to bring the Virtua Gun onto modern displays, because the Saturn version, at a technical level, is just absolutely phenomenal. It's another one of those games that, for me, in my mind's eye, it's arcade perfect. It's lower resolution, but the way it runs, the way it looks, the way it sounds, the way it plays, it's carried over amazingly, and it's just testament to that team, a team of rookies who, despite all the shit about the Saturn's hard to develop for, will just stick some rookies on, and they just managed to port that game over. So that's my impassioned defense of Virtua Cop.
Well said, mate.
Love it.
It's an interesting game in that it's Virtua Cop 2 that actually got more ports to other systems. You had the Dreamcast port of Virtua Cop 2. But you didn't get a Dreamcast port of Virtua Cop 1. I don't know why that was. So yeah, it is one that was, aside from kind of the Sega PC port, which I don't actually have any experience with myself. The PS2 Elite Edition is just so visually different, and I think it plays quite different as well. I think the way that the way that the movement and the way that the characters kind of that behave on the screen, like your enemies and the targeting, something just feels off about it. It's fine, but yeah, there's a magic to that original Sega Saturn port. What are your thoughts on that one, Mel?
Oh, that game came out at a time when everybody in my circle of friends were kind of holding their breath for the big three releases at the end of 95. Because, there was all this talk about Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally, and Virtua Cop. And it was like, they're the games that really show what the Saturn can do. So, we're all sort of waiting with, these incredible expectations. And I remember me and my friends talking about it, and I'm like, dude, there's no doubt that these games are going to play well. Virtua Fighter on the Saturn played well. Daytona USA played well. There was no doubt these games were going to deliver in gameplay, but I had my own questions about whether any of them were going to deliver visually. The fact of the matter is, the Saturn wasn't as powerful as Sega's arcade boards. You knew they were going to get cut back pretty heavily, right? And then here comes Virtua Cop. And it was just like, holy shit. This looks so much like the arcade. Like, I can't believe what they've done here. And you go back and you put them side by side, you can see differences, of course. But just playing that on the Saturn for the first time, it really was the first time you had played a Saturn three-dimensional arcade port where you said, the Saturn did it. The Saturn did it. It did everything it needed to do to convey the arcade experience home. And that made Virtua Cop special, because there you go. You have a light gun. You had a light gun that the peripheral itself was really nice. Then you had the quality of this arcade port. And of course, as the years go by, finally you have somebody just tear down how the game was developed. And it's like, wow, I'm even more impressed that it ended up the way that it ended up, because if you really think about it, that could have been a disaster, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh my God, that could have been just a terrible thing. And it's so funny, perception and reality, because back then you would read these gaming magazines and you would think that Yu Suzuki himself was right there programming every line of code for these Saturn games to turn out the way they did. And of course, as time has gone on, you realize none of that was the case. Like, this dude was overseeing some of these projects, but it was very much the like die-hard passion of these Sega employees to get out software that was actually good. And that makes games like Virtua Cop so special, because the Saturn really needed those games, didn't it? You
Mhm.
know, it was getting kind of beat up for Virtua Fighter. It was kind of getting beat up for Daytona because they didn't look as nice as the PlayStation alternatives. Everybody, you know, is rubbing their pecker to Toshinden and Ridge Racer. You know, this is like the best thing ever. You know, and the Saturn didn't have a lot of ammunition at that time. So when this showed up, it ran great. The models were great. The gameplay was there. Then Sega Rally drops, Virtua Fighter 2 drops, and it's like, yes, finally, we've got some ammunition to argue. And, you know, Virtua Cop was all part of that. So awesome choice, man. Great game.
Yeah, fantastic choice. Cool. So, on to my second one. My second one is another one that is still exclusive, and it's another one that's kind of strange that it is still exclusive because out of a lot of these games, it's one that you'd think would have been ripe for a Dreamcast version. I thought that we would see one, but we never did, and that is Burning Rangers. So from Sonic Team, it's it's another game that's unique in its premise. You know, Knights was unique. This one kind of leans more into kind of the platform era, and I think a lot of the work that's been done by Bo Bales in kind of deconstructing a lot of these games on the Sega Saturn. I think he's found that there's an awful lot of source code that's used in Burning Rangers that was carried across into Sonic Adventure, and you really do feel that. But yeah, it's got the unique premise that you don't actually fight anything apart from, you know, a few robots here and there, and they're very rare, but you're mainly just going around fighting fires. And what I love about it is there's so much to love about it, in fact, but the unique premise and the way that it builds tension, you know, you've got your gauge that builds up, you know, and it gets every 20%, you know, explosions start going off, and you get to this point where the fires get more and more intense. It gets more difficult to save people. Obviously, you've got to rescue people. You collect the crystals, which work like Sonic the Hedgehog's rings. You collect them. If you get hit, you drop them, but you can pick them up again, and then you use those to teleport them. Um, you know, the survivors that are listed around the level. I think it gets a bit of stick because it's quite a short game. You know, there's 4 episodes. Three of them are, you know, the kind of the core game where you're going around and you're rescuing people, fighting fires, get to an end level boss, and then the fourth one is a lot more platform focused. There's a lot more kind of enemies and doesn't have anyone to rescue. But the magic around that game is that it's infinitely replayable. And I remember it takes a couple of hours to get through. You know, it doesn't take long at all, really. You know, you've got the tutorial mode, which on one hand it's ahead of its time, but good God, you know, you don't want to play that all the time. I'm so glad that I think there's a way that you can skip it now. Um, but the getting through from beginning to end only takes a couple of hours. But once you beat it, the levels randomize, you know, they're procedurally generated out of so many different templates. And I think there's over 3,000, nearly 4,000, I think. And what I love about it is the game is enormous fun to play, like you'd expect the Sonic Team game to be. You know, it's basically Sonic with a water pistol at the end of the day that can do all these aerial acrobatics and fly and stuff. You know, you probably even trace like his homing attack in Sonic Adventure to like the jump and boost in Burning Rangers. So it's great fun to play, and then you add that to something that's infinitely replayable. I spent so many months after this came out still playing it. I was playing it deep into all the way until I got my Dreamcast. I was playing it every other day, um, and I was trying to unlock all the survivors, and there is a lot of them. There is so many survivors, and then you rescue people like Clarice and Elliot from the original Nights into
Mhm.
Dreams. you rescue someone, and you get the messages from the people you've saved, which I absolutely loved. And it really kind of brings them to life and humanizes them. So you get like guys that come over to you, they send you their little emails, because that's one of my favorite things. Every time I turn it on or complete a mission, I don't go straight into the game. I scroll down, I go into my fan mail, and I just start reading my emails. It's like, oh, I was thinking of doing this career, and then I saw you, and now I'm gonna try my best to be a burning ranger, or I'm gonna be a marine biologist. And you get all these different stories, all these different like miniature narratives in these characters. So you get that side of it, and then you get Clarice and Elliot, and then you rescue someone. And then it will come up, and it was like, "Hey, it's Yuji Naka here." And you get people from Sonic Team, that and no, they're super rare to find in all of these combinations. But then once I got like the first one, I just kept going and I couldn't stop. Um, and obviously, my at some point my battery went in I lost all my saves on my Sega Saturn. I was heartbroken. But it's just Burning Rangers is just one of these games that I think is just so playable and so replayable. And even though at face value it doesn't seem like there's a lot of content, there's an awful lot of legs in how it plays and what you can keep going back to. You couple that with, yeah, the visuals are pretty amazing. They're a little bit messy, and I think if it wasn't for the fact that the Dreamcast was just around the corner, um, along with Sonic Adventure, and most of the team were having to move from Burning Rangers to Sonic Adventure to get that out in Japan before the end of the year. If they had a little bit more time, I'd like to think that they were able to clear up some of the glitch and polygons. But what's there, the lighting effects, the transparencies, the way that it moves is pretty astonishing. And in terms of kind of a fully featured 3D action game, I do think in a way it's comparable to something like, obviously completely different gameplay wise, but in terms of kind of technical and the technical side, I do think Metal Gear Solid that came out the same year, it's not a million miles away from that. And then, of course, the sound design is astonishing as well. You've got the amazing music, you've got the navigation system. The acting, the voice acting in that is pretty decent, and the amount of work that must have gone in, not just to create the lines of dialogue and everything, but there's still nothing else really quite like it. These days you'll have like a mini map or a HUD that tells you where to go, or an objective marker, but they actually had this code that you know, prompted voice commands that physically told you where to go when you asked. Um, Amazing. So overall, I think it's an amazing feat, and the fact that it's imperfect visually on the Sega Saturn. It looks astonishing, but at the same time, we know that it could be better. The fact that we didn't see it on the Sega Dreamcast, like Nights into Dreams, where you got the pinball table, you're like, oh yes, Nights into Dreams on the Sega Dreamcast is coming, and it didn't. Whereas you had the Burning Rangers themed episode in Phantasy Star Online, and that was just like, oh, and then that didn't come either. It was just like a little tease, but it's just such a shame that I know there's the fan project looks really cool, but it's like Fighters Megamix. It should be a franchise, or it should be playable on more modern hardwares, and it just isn't. So another one I think is magical for the Sega Saturn, but by the same token, it would be nice if other people got to play it on other platforms. What are your thoughts on this one, Mel?
You know, Burning Rangers, man, is a product of where the Saturn was in its kind of its lifetime, wasn't it? It's like you've got Sonic Team who's been working on this game. When it was coming out, Sega is fully aware the Saturn is going to crash and burn in the Western territories. You can't help but to get this feeling that they were like sort of kicking at Sonic Team. Go ahead and finish this up. We know the engine isn't quite as tight as you want it. We know it only has a handful of like missions, but go ahead and take care of this because company's ready to go out of business. you know so you can't help but to feel that for as good as that game is, man, if the Saturn had been healthier, and that sucker had 6 months, 8 months, 10 months more of development, Can you imagine what that game could have been?
Mm.
They would have been talking about that game with the likes of the best of that generation. I think the only thing that holds it back really is that it was short, that the visuals that still were really good did have some clipping issues. They did have some polygon issues where stuff would appear and disappear, and you know, I don't know, man. Everything about that game that you could spit at it as it was bad or wrong or could have been better is such a small thing to actually everything that it did right. You know, you drop into those missions, man, and that navigator instantly is talking to you, and you feel kind of like there really is somebody on the other end of that headset guiding you through. And it's like you go back and you play it again, and it's like, hey, wait a minute, I'm kind of going a different way this time. How is this person telling me to go these different ways? You know, it's kind of like, this is really cool game design here. What other games really did that at the time? That was kind of cool. And, you know, I had a great time with that game once I really got into it. I will tell you a really quick story. That game pissed me off so bad the first time I played it because it wouldn't let me skip the intro, man. And you know, that intro is like walk down the hall, jump on these blocks. Oh, there's a fire. Oh, there's crystals coming from the fire. And it was just so long and so boring. I just wanted to press start, man. Like, just let me pass this for God's sake. But negative first impression aside, man, Burning Rangers was a great game on the Saturn.
Brilliant. No, you're right. Everything you're saying, guys, is spot on. I think with it coming so late in the Saturn's life, I think it did get grossly overlooked. But what it does very, very well. Like the navigation system, like you said, Dan, games today, they baby you so much. Like we're spoken like God of War, we've seen that clip. It's like, you know, it's weakest when you attack from the rear. Like it literally has to tell the player how to attack a boss. You know, your hand is held so much with a lot of modern games, but you know, Burning Rangers was like in these levels, they could get quite kind of claustrophobic. Like as those fires were, you know, ramping up, you know, obviously the oxygen levels are changing, the flames are getting more intense. You hear that whooshing noise and you know that shit's coming, and you've got to try and put out what's there or get out of dodge. You know, there's times where the lights would go out, the electricity fails, you're in complete darkness, and you still hear those whooshes. And it's like there's almost this brilliant sense of panic that it induces, which I suppose as a firefighter, it probably would be pretty stressful if you're in pitch black darkness with fires coming. So, what you're talking about, you know, the game makes it feel like through the navigation system that there's someone with you. You couple that with that kind of almost claustrophobic sense of panic of fighting those fires, the pressure of having to rescue those people. It's kind of almost it's like a pretty good firefighter simulator. You know, it's like it's as daft as it sounds, but it's a gameplay experience. It does evoke a lot of emotions. You know, tension, panic, like the sense of pride that you mentioned, Dan, at getting those messages from those people you rescued. You know, it's made up stories on a game's
Yeah.
email, but the game was rewarding you. You know, with those and again, that's something that Sega does so well with its game design. They know what they're doing, Sonic Team, when they're putting that in there. You know, those little kind of Easter eggs that they're dropping in. But yeah, visually, it can look rough in places, and the criticisms of like only one analog stick on the 3D pad whenever you use that, or just using the standards, you know, D-pad and shoulder buttons to move cameras around, and it can get in the way a little bit. But yeah, like the randomizing of directions, everything about it is just it's a beautiful, beautiful game. I mean, I remember that I featured it on the video I did for the channel, the best 3D Saturn games. It was either part one or part two. And at the point in my script, I championed the transparencies of the fires, right? And someone in the comment left a timestamp and went, mentions transparency effects, but then shows us a screen full of mesh effect shadows on smoke. And I'm like, fuck off, man. It's like I clearly reference the fact that the big giant ball of flame in front of you can be seen through. It's like sometimes people just want to nitpick. It's like they want to hold on to these kind of preconceptions and look for a negative. But the fire effects at the time, you know, given everything Saturn had been, lambasted for when it came to transparencies, like Sonic R as well did a great job, VDP2 using multi-texturing to overlay those transparencies on top of VDP1 objects. And it's similar there with Burning Rangers. The fire, being so transparent, so beautifully done, it just adds to it. Like you can see where you need to go, but the flames they're transparent enough to see where you need to be, but they're also so, all encompassing. You almost feel the heat off them. It's so absolutely a brilliant game. And as you guys have rightly said, it's a shame it came, so close to the end of the Saturn's life. Like Sega basically going, right, we've got Sonic Adventure to finish. That's meant to be a launch game. Finish this shit so we can, move on. But aye, and what you said there, Dan, about it would have been mentioned alongside, like a Metal Gear Solid. I can see the comparisons that you're making in terms of same year, what it was trying to do visually, kind of more advanced effects than we had seen, in the generation at that point, all kind of coming together. So yeah, it is a short game, but as a gameplay experience, what it brings to the table is phenomenal. Again, locked on Saturn. Hopefully, it's Andreas Scholl that's kind of teasing
I think so.
The kind of the remake stuff, and it looks absolutely amazing. It looks like what it would probably look like had it came to Dreamcast. But yeah, great choice, brilliant.
A lot of you say get that shit out the door. It's like Sonic Team had a whole generation where they'd got made Knights and then Burning Rangers. Like, all right, stop pissing around with these ideas now and just make Sonic become a Sonic factory again and make us some money.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, when I first when I was thinking about laying this episode out, I thought, well, let's do 5 each. So it's been we've done 2 each, and I think we're already coming up to the 2 hour mark. So this may have to be the last one. But you stick three passionate Sega guys and put some of the best games of the system, and you know that the conversation's gonna really take hold. So I think these may have to be our last ones. But Mel, obviously coming back round to you. What's the last Sega Saturn exclusive you'd love to champion?
Okay, well, I had a couple in front of this one, but I'm going to bring this one up anyway because I really do believe this is a Saturn game. It really doesn't get the love that it should. And I mean, Deep Fear.
Oh, yes.
Came out at a time when Capcom had laid out Resident Evil and introduced the world of console gaming, kind of the survival horror style games. And I know there were games like, Resident Evil before Resident Evil, but Resident Evil sells millions of copies and it's on console and it's introduced all these new players to these types of games and it's so popular. And Sega's probably looking at that and going, let's make our game. Let's do something on our machine. And they bring out Deep Fear, and Deep Fear scared me and made me feel panic in a way that Resident Evil never did, and for numerous reasons. Number one, man, I'm one of those people, I despise deep water. So the idea of being in deep water just instantly bothers me. And then there was this idea that you could walk into a room and not only worry about monsters that may be trying to kill you, but maybe you can't breathe either, and I don't know. There was so much tension in Deep Fear, the way it was presented. You had more to worry about than you typically had to worry about in Resident Evil. Yet the gameplay itself, the layout, the setup, the backtracking and finding clues and how to make your way through the game, it captured everything that pretty much made Resident Evil appealing. And so it had these extra elements, and then it introduced the ability to draw your gun and move while the gun was drawn, which sort of at kind of up the ante for the gameplay, where the gameplay felt a little bit better than it did in Resident Evil. And it came out at a time where the Japanese version comes out, a UK version came out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
It did, yeah.
But the US version gets canceled and doesn't come out. So, of course, at that time, the only way me and my buddies can play it is to import it. And while it did have the English voice acting, so much Japanese was in it. Text was in it. It made it tough to play it. So I wasn't able to fully appreciate it until sometime later. But when I was able to finally play through that game, I just sat there and said to myself, why in God's name did Sega of America not release this for the US Saturn? It's like the game was like the game type was popular. They could have played up that it was like Resident Evil. And so many Saturn owners in my neck of the woods missed it because Sega didn't want to, release it, even though it had been translated to English, which is mind numbing at the time, because isn't it the very least Sega of America could have done was just keep the release date? So there were a few more Sega Saturn games released in 1998 instead of the little spattering that we got, where we then had to wait a year and a half for the Dreamcast to even show up. It's like, what was Sega doing? And Deep Fear was one of those games we missed. Deep Fear was one of those games that is so overlooked. It is such a good Saturn experience. So much like, uneasy feelings, especially for someone like me. It's like you're underwater, man. You can't breathe. There's freaking mutated like creatures everywhere. You had to worry about the resources, everything that made Resident Evil what it was on top of these elements. Man, Deep Fear was a great game. I don't care what anybody says.
I completely agree. I say tongue in cheek often that it's the greatest survival horror game of 1998. Obviously, obviously, I don't think you could probably put Resident Evil 2 over the top of it, but it's a lot closer than I think a lot of people give it credit for. I first played this on release. My friend bought it. He bought it from he bought the power version, obviously, but it was when we'd already had our Saturns converted and were playing kind of Japanese games at the time. But he bought that, and I think Castlevania came out around the same time. I kind of get the feeling that both of those came around in similar windows, and we were playing both. So I had Castlevania Symphony of the Night, he had Deep Fear, and yeah, we were just, voice acting aside, and the voice acting is I don't even think it's so bad. It's good. It's just really bad.
Yeah, it's total shit.
Yeah, but the rest of the game is pretty phenomenal. I mean, from a gameplay perspective, yeah, I think it plays better than Resident Evil. The fact that you can move with the gun, the way that you move around and stuff. What I love about Deep Fear as well, and I've seen people say that it trivializes it, but you don't have the ammo isn't as restrictive as Resident Evil. In that, you have to find it, and then when you run out, that's it. You basically soft locked your game unless you get really good at killing things with the crappy little knife.
Right.
But Deep Fear, you still have that tension, especially because there's so many boss encounters in Deep Fear compared to something like Resident Evil. And I remember there's a section. It's a spoiler for anyone that hasn't played it, but you see there's an underwater farm. Obviously, they need to survive somehow, and one of the creatures in this farm, one of the animals, obviously mutates into something horrendous, and you have to fight. And there's a kind of this dread as you're going back and forth. And you can expend your ammo really quickly. I mean, the beauty of Deep Fear is that once you get over those spikes, you do get a little bit of a reprieve where you can go in and you can recharge your oxygen mask. You can kind of save your game, redispense the oxygen around the area, and top up your ammo because the ammo supply in the storage areas is infinite. But that for me didn't remove the tension. it still feels like you're really, every encounter feels like one that you can lose. Um, and you find you trap yourself in a room with like three or four enemies and you start firing off. And then you're like, right, well, I've shot these guys and they've gone down, but they're getting back up again. And you look and then all of a sudden the air counter in the thing is ticking down and that goes red and the screen goes red. You're like, oh my God, what the
Absolutely.
hell? And it's a long game as well for a survival horror game. Resident Evil, I think you can do that in about, I think back in the day it took me about 6, 7 hours first time, and then after that I can do it in about 3 or 4. But Deep Fear, I think it's about 10 hours. It's a decent length game over the 2 discs, and the story's not too bad either. The story's pretty decent. So I think aside from the voice acting, which is really bad. I mean, Dubois, the guy that's kind of the technician, has got the really over the top voice. I think it's just like that's just so unnecessary.
Yeah,
Um,
comically bad.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, but aside from the voice acting, it's an absolutely phenomenal survival horror game. And no, yeah, fantastic shout, Mal. James, have you played much of this one? I know you call yourself a shite bag in certain games like this, don't you?
I've dabbled in it, but Mel is he's speaking to the converted when it comes to deep water, man. See deep water or open water, that shit just unnerves me, man. Like I need to be able to see something to hold on to when I'm in any kind of water because I just no. It's like I feel you there, man. It's
Oh yeah.
uh, but it does a great job. Again, and what was Sega doing trying to make people shit themselves with these games? Like Burning Rangers, you're fighting fire in the dark. Deep Fear will just send you underwater with no oxygen, struggling to breathe. It's like, you know, but I think in many ways, I don't know if Deep Fear kind of it's almost at like two fingers up to Capcom for not giving Resident Evil 2 to the Saturn. It's almost like, well, fuck it, we'll do it ourselves kind of thing. We'll make our own take. Because visually, I think it's easily on par. Some of the kind of the scenes that I've seen for how far I've got anyway, it looks great. Very voice acting's par for the course for the era. But yeah, it's got the tank controls. What you said there about the game giving you a chance to kind of breathe, for pardon the pun, but those kind of peaks and troughs where you can recharge and kind of take stock of things. But the oxygen mechanic is absolutely brilliant because obviously, if you fire off your gun too frequently, then you're impacting the oxygen level. So that kind of risk and reward balance, as you said, ammunition's not as restrictive as it is in Resident Evil, but you still have to manage it in a different way, so you've got to choose carefully when you want to unload that weapon. So, but the mutations, man, some of them are fucking grotesque. It's like that's how much of a shitbag I am. Like, I've told a story to Dan before, like, but see the film Aliens, right? My best friend Sam loved Aliens, right? He brought it over in VHS whenever it came out. That's how old we are, right? And like on VCRs, like a big feature of new players was like auto tracking. You don't have to track that tape yourself. The machine does it for you. But I didn't want to watch this, right? I was like, oh, Sam, I don't want to watch this, man. Like, horror stuff just does not sit well with me. So I hid the remote control from a GVC VHS player down the side of the couch, and I turned off auto tracking. Sam puts the tape in, and we're sitting there ready to watch it, and I'm literally sitting manually tracking it to distort the picture. And I'm like, mate, your tape's gubbed. Mate, that's a brand new VHS player. I don't know what's wrong. We'll watch something else then. Like, I don't know, Ace Ventura or some shit get put on in its place. It's like, but it's like, no. So I am a total shitbag when it comes to like horror and survival horror games. But when I got the Fenrir, obviously, and I put the US version on there because it is out. That's the jarring thing. Like, they finished the game for the US market. It was done. Like, the code's out there. They just decided not to print it and package it up for, obviously, Bernie Stoller decided it wasn't going to happen. I think he's kiboshed that one. But yeah, we got it in Europe. Just bizarre. But it's definitely visually and gameplay wise and content wise for such a late release in a system's life. You know, you're getting a lot of game in there, and it more than holds its own against the Resident Evil series.
Yeah. It was one of those games too when it came out. You really did get a feel with the gaming magazines how little respect they had for the Saturn at that point, because even the ones that covered it, most magazines just didn't give it its due. They kind of did these short, import reviews over here in the States, didn't really like talk it up very much. It's like, hey, this game it really is a very decent Resident Evil clone, but they didn't really do anything to make you feel like this was something you should have to play.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't help but get the feeling that if that same year this game had come out for the PlayStation or it had come out for the Nintendo 64, those reviews would have read completely different.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been like, oh yeah, Deep Fear, the Resident Evil 2, competitor that really is worth checking out, but we of course didn't get anything like that.
The Resident Evil killer, I think, would have
Yeah.
been the headline,
Oh,
wouldn't it?
yeah.
Yeah.
The irony about the power release is it's completely unoptimized as well. It's just like we do just have the US version. It just is it's just there's massive borders. It's not sped up, you know. It was a good thing at the time that we actually had our Sega Saturns converted so that we could like switch them over to 60 hertz because the PAL version is just literally right. We'll take the US version and we'll just drop that on a disc without any optimization whatsoever, which is absolutely. And then the more you think about it, the more insane it is that we got this unoptimized, just drag and drop, NTSC US release, and then it didn't come out in America at all. It's just absolute insanity.
Oh.
That's Sega for you.
It is, mate. Right. So, James, what's your last Sega Saturn exclusive that we'll talk about today? I think we'll have to do this again, guys, and
That's what
rattle
I
off
was
even
thinking.
more another time.
This has to be a series, man, because there's too many games. Looking through my list again, I'm picking ones that so this one is still exclusive to the Saturn, and I'm going to go with Panzer Dragoon Saga. And I've got a lot to say about this in terms of I think Panzer Dragoon Saga has two kind of camps in the retro gaming community just now. There's the people who played it when it came out, and there's the people who only want it because it's a rare commodity. And I think people who buy it because of its rarity and its reputation are not going to see the game, I think, in the same light as people who've seen it back in the day. I think if you're paying 800 quid for a game and you're wanting to get blown away by it, I don't think Panzer Dragoon Saga will do that. It's no game's worth the money that is asked for these days. But if you go back to Sega Saturn magazine and the death throes, and Richard Ledbetter, Mr. Digital Foundry himself, somehow convinced Sega to give him the entire first disc to put on the cover of a magazine. Never done before. This wasn't a demo, this was the full first disc. Your save could carry over into the retail game, and I remember I put that on. I was sitting there with Sam, Behold the Precious Wings comes on, that amazing title screen score. The score in the game is amazing. Within, 10, 15 minutes of playing that, I was on the phone to gameplay, like the mail order, pre-internet days. I'm on there, like, I need to pre-order this. $37.99 it cost me. And it obviously it comes through and that beautiful packaging, the double disc set in there and the lovely sleeve. But it was such a dramatic change in terms of tone. Like, I think a lot of people at the time, they've seen a new Panzer Dragoon game, and instantly they're thinking, like, if you had the name Panzer Dragoon Saga, you're thinking, oh, this is the end of the trilogy. It's going to be a big fuck off war. Like, it's a saga. We're going to go all in. It's going to be epic. We've seen what happened with SEGA, and then you get a kind of RPG. And I think the change of tone may have been jarring for a lot of people, but when taken on its own merits, like, I'm not a big JRPG fan at all. Like, I tried to get into Final Fantasy VII, just couldn't do it. Like, random battles and shit. We've spoken about that before. But what Saga did well is it took just enough of the gameplay of the Panzer Dragoon games, mixed it into the kind of exploration. It sort of shoehorned it into that kind of open world exploration. The battles, yeah, they were randomized, but they weren't quite as intrusive. But you still felt like you had a real modicum of control over what was going on. Your movement was, you could still have your red and green areas where you were safe to dodge and build up your meters to then, time it to come back round and unleash hell, on these grotesque looking, monsters that were in the valleys and the levels. The dragon morphing mechanics that we'd mentioned earlier, very, I think it was kind of taken from the idea from s5e, where the dragon matured and grew in power. They sort of brought that over, but allowed players to, tweak and choose. Right, I'm going at that level, I'm fighting that enemy, so I need more of that power and less of that. And you had a real choice over how you wanted your dragon to look and feel and perform. And it never feels overbearing. It feels like there's just enough of a foot in the action part of it, but yet the story has that great hook. The CGI cutscenes are brilliant. Edge being betrayed and the Empire, killing his friends and his family, and that kind of opening cutscene, and he's left for dead. And yeah, the on foot levels with Edge running around kind of villages and stuff like that can grate a little bit. Like try to find those parts, man. For is it Payet he's called? As a pain in the ass, man. That guy is like, these aren't the parts I'm looking for. Go back and find me more. Just tell me where the fucking tower is, man. Just let me go and fight people. But in a whole, I think as an overall package, it's got a great feel to it. Again, it's one of the last kind of the games that we've discussed. Actually, the last three have all been 1998 kind of end of life releases, and I think if anything, it shows just despite some of them being rushed, there's still an insane level of quality there that showed that there was a lot of juice still left in the Saturn in terms of power. That I still don't think we actually seen the absolute best of what that hardware could do, but we were getting hints at it. And Panzer Dragoon Saga it merges just enough action, plenty of story, an absolutely beautiful score. Like I've got it on my Spotify playlists. Like if I go on Radio Sega when I'm in the office and I request music to listen to, like I'll pick tracks from that 9 times out of 10. It's just beautiful. Like the intro music as well, which is the Azel theme, which is absolutely beautiful. That kind of that drum that kicks in. Dan, you get goosebumps talking about s5e. I've got them here. Feel like the Rock at WrestleMania here. It's happening the goosebumps, but everything about it, I think, as a package, it works so well. But I can understand that people initially hearing Panzer Dragoon Saga were thinking they were getting the end of the trilogy in terms of the kind of the rail shooters. But what Saga does, it does so well. It's just the right length, and it's got that beautiful sound design, beautiful visuals. The monsters are also varied and grotesque, and obviously you've got the Azel aspect in there as well. It's just absolutely brilliant. I don't want to kind of go into spoilers for people who haven't played it and finished it, but quite an ending as well. So that's my choice. I just think if you had experienced it coming back in the day, I think you would have a very different opinion of it compared to if you've just shelled out like £1,000 for a copy, today. There you go.
Oh, well said, mate. Ironically, I didn't actually play this all the way through back in the day. So my story about picking this game up, obviously, you know it well enough, James, but yeah, it's laughing already. So me and my friend Charlie went out to buy Shining Force 3 and Panzer Dragoon came out within a week of each other in the UK. Panzer came out first, Shining Force 3 a week after. My friend got paid first, and he said, "Well, I'll buy Panzer. I'll play that. You buy Shining Force 3, you play that, and then we'll swap." And long term, I wanted Panzer, he wanted Shining Force 3, and like that was like we'd end up with a game that we'd long term wanted, but it wouldn't be the first game he played. So he got Panzer Dragoon, takes it home, and I'll go with him. He'd already played disc 1, for Sega Saturn magazine, and we're sitting there all afternoon. He plays through disc two, um, and he's like, "Well, I've finished with these. You might as well take because in the UK, I'm not sure how it looks in the how the US version looks, but in the UK, the PAL version was like two Sega Saturn cases, but in one cardboard like sleeve. So he just took the plastic case with the first two discs in and said, "Yeah, take that, go home." I was on my bike, and I was like, "Right, I'm going to rush home. I'm going to carry on. I'm going to carry on with my save on disc two." As I'm cycling home, I'm literally round the corner from my house where I live, and from out of nowhere, this football hits the front of my bike. I'm holding, and I've not got a backpack on or anything. I've just got one hand on the handlebar, and my bike careens into this fence, and my fist holding the game goes through the fence, and I pull the game out, pull my fist out, and the game is sheared in half. Like the disc two is snapped in half. The box is obliterated. I've still got it on the shelf there. It's behind, but it's like so. I didn't actually. Ended up owning Panzer Dragoon Saga on release day in 1998, and I didn't get to play it until 2000 and 2004. It would have been when I was in my first full-time job.
Wow.
My friend gave me his saves for disc four, so I'd seen the ending and I played around a bit, but all I could do was play disc one and then play disc four off the back of his save that he sent me. And luckily, I managed to get a replacement disc two when it was still the prices weren't astronomical. I think I paid £60 for it was disc one and two and the manual in one package, which wasn't too bad. So you get like overall the game still cost me about £100 to play. But once I finally got to play it, you know, I'd loved it anyway. I loved that disc one that came with Sega Saturn magazine. I'd played it over and over, and I'd play it so much that I'd get like the top rank excellent for every combat scenario. Um, and it's a game that didn't disappoint at all as far as I was concerned. I think the battle system in there is still quite unlike almost anything else that's out there at the moment. That's ever been out there. It's got a bit of Final Fantasy's active time battle system, and then you let that charge up to 3 bars for various attacks, and then the way that you move around the enemies, especially as you get into kind of the late game, and you'll get kind of the things with the horns that charge up, or some of the flying enemies, and you'll try and maneuver into their weak spot to get behind them and get that easy win, and they'll very quickly kind of twitch you back into position. So you spend a lot of it kind of toing and froing, which if people are listening to this and never played it, they probably think, well, that sounds like nonsense, but there's something engaging about it, and that there's like this real kind of feeling of like you're dogfighting with these enemies, um, and it remains one of my favorite, despite it being linked to just a frustration and tragedy around it. It remains one of my favorite games of all time. I love the story behind it and the way that you can really feel when you play the s5e and Saga that Futsugi had an idea to say, right, well, we've got this solo Panzer Dragoon story, but let's turn it into a universe and let's link that up across the three games. And when you get like this Vi, obviously I spoke about Vi earlier, has multiple endings, and one of those ties into the first game. And then in Saga, it kind of brings it all together, and you understand why the world is as it is, um, and the way that you know it's not as there's not as many kind of tropes in Panzer Dragoon Saga. It's still quite a unique narrative, quite well placed. And then people that the whole reason that you're embarking on this quest and adventure kind of flips on its head once you get to like disc three, and the relationships and the with certain characters will change. And it's just so wonderfully done. And you couple that with the amazing graphics, the transparent water effects, the the music is absolutely phenomenal for all the way through it. The voice acting, the cutscenes, especially the ones with Azel in, they're absolutely phenomenal. It's just in my head, it remains one of the greatest games of all time. And yeah, it's another one that I think is a shame that it's stuck on Saturn.
Yeah, Saga's one of those games that I catch a lot of flack for as a YouTuber because Man, I had the audacity to do a Sega Saturn top 25 and not include Panzer Dragoon Saga in it. And man, Saturn fans were pissed. It's like, how can you have a top 10, much less a top 25, without the system's best game? And here's the thing, and I've spoke about it before. I have a little bit of a story with this one, and to sum it up as best I can so that we're not talking about it for an hour. Back at this time, you have to understand, I am an action arcade kind of gamer, you know? So I play Panzer Dragoon 1, play Panzer Dragoon 2. They are these on-rail shooters. They're intense. They're to the point. You know, you pick it up and you play it and you know what to expect. And then I get my friend Nathan got Panzer Dragoon Saga, and I remember he buys it. And you had to pre-order it because in the US at that time they released so little in terms of product. If you didn't pre-order it, you wouldn't get one. So he had pre-ordered it, and he had gotten it his first, and I had pre-ordered mine as well, but I hadn't gotten mine yet. So the very first time I saw it was on his Saturn. And when he fires it up and it's random battles and it's this story, I'm like, man, this is not Panzer Dragoon. This is not what I want to see. This is not what I want to play. Random freaking battles, man. Are you free? Oh, are you kidding me? Like, you've basically taken what makes Panzer and you've stripped it away. Those were my first impressions. And unfortunately, that kind of became how I felt, because when I got my game, I tried to play it. It was the same thing. It's like, good God, man, I'm sitting here, these awful on foot sections. I'm random battling instead of just being able to move where I want my guy and tearing everything out the sky like I did in the previous two games. I just didn't appreciate it. And I actually returned the game to the game shop and got a refund. That was my initial, experience with the game. Now you have to fast forward now. It was years. I can't pinpoint exactly when I picked it up again. It was definitely years. I finally decide to give the game another chance because I'm still playing my Saturn. Of course, the internet is blowing up at this time. Everybody's talking about how great Saga is, and it's one of the best Saturn games. So I finally decide to sit down and play it. And at this point, I'm a little more tolerant to random battles. I'm a little more tolerant to cinematics. I'm a little more tolerant in general of that style of game design. So I get into it. And the story opens up, well enough, it's kind of one of those games. You're at work, a bunch of assholes show up, kill everybody, you find a weapon to kill them, you go after them, story starts. So I get into it, and it seems so simple at first, but the story's kind of gets an emotional element to it where it's like, oh, okay, I see where they're going with this. And it's like, it starts to introduce like some gameplay mechanics that I'm really starting to appreciate, because instead of being bogged down with these little asshole enemies that take me like 2 minutes to kill, I'm meeting some enemies where it seems like I'm having to dogfight these guys. The gameplay's feeling better. It's feeling deeper, kind of as I got into it. And you have to keep in mind, I didn't play very deep into it initially. So I'm starting to see things and discover things that I hadn't before. And I'm starting to appreciate it. And I go on to beat the game. And I walk away from it. Yes, Panzer Dragoon Saga is so much better than I initially gave it credit for. Those battles, like you say, they feel like dog fights. you get in, especially when you're fighting some of those bosses, because you just don't walk in and tear those guys down. You really have to watch their attacks. They can get you in some situations where, yeah, they're going to kill your ass if you're not careful, and I mean, I really did appreciate that. The biggest problem with me, long term opinion of that game, is that it just wasn't the action arcade wrap up to that trilogy that I wanted it to be. I wanted the Saturn version to end with a third generation engine, BDP2 perfect, BDP1 most polygons the Saturn had ever put out. I wanted this explosive on rails action conclusion to this incredible series of games that I had loved. And instead, at that time, I got a freaking RPG, man. And it just wasn't what I wanted. It wasn't how I wanted that Saturn trilogy wrapped up. That's what hit my initial opinion about it. Years since, I have come to appreciate it. It's just not one of my favorites because I had that built up personal expectation of it, and I think that affects a lot of people. It's your personal expectation really does play a big role in how a game lands with you. And that's how it was with Panzer Saga for me.
That's
Yeah,
pretty fair enough. I mean, as you said, if you're expecting, and that's why I brought that caveat in my own kind of chat about it, because yeah, if you wanted that action finale, Saturn's going out with a bang kind of thing, and if you're that personally invested in those games, and all of a sudden you get such a dramatic change of pace, it is going to be jarring. But here, Mel, top 10s and top 25s are all personal. You know what I mean? That's it. If it's not in there, it's not in there. So it's his choice, man. Just
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you.
and that means there's 25 other amazing games that people need to check out.
Exactly.
I mean,
See, exactly.
yeah, I think if seeing a third generation Panzer Dragoon action game would have been absolutely phenomenal. If it came out in 1998 with all the refinements. You look at some of the technology that Team Andromeda brought to Saga, which was obviously, it's built to accommodate a more open world environment. If they used that technology more for like a straight action rail shooter, that could have been incredible. And if the Saturn had lived longer, maybe we would have seen that third one of the trilogy. We did get Auto, although I do feel Auto thematically and stylistically is quite different, but it does kind of scratch that itch because it is. I was replaying it the other day. It's especially at the beginning, it's such an epic opening. With all the explosions and everything, it's fantastic. But
yeah, that was kind of what I was expecting, or not expecting so much, but wanting,
yeah,
Saga to be. I wanted it to just be this, hey, show me what you guys have learned with these on rail games and just show the Saturn in its best light. And it's just, when that expectation, as I said, because I wasn't a real big RPG guy back then, I was hit with a role playing game. It was such a letdown at that time. I honestly think it traumatized me and I haven't recovered since.
The ultimate Saturn bait and switch. I think is
Yeah.
it's like
yeah. I think for me, I'd played a lot of Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. I think I'd actually beaten it on PlayStation 1 at that point. I think I borrowed it from a friend and played through it. And my friend Charlie, who actually bought the game and was waiting for Shining Force 3. Obviously, you look at those two games, they're both massive, long RPGs. I think that it comes down to what you were looking for, what you were expecting, what you were playing. And I think Saga was kind of that perfect game at the perfect time for me. Whereas, yeah, it all comes down to your expectation and that first impression. Is it? I think we spoke before, Mel, on the Shiro Editors Corner about how important those first impressions are.
Yeah,
And yeah, as much as we try to change them, they still live with us.
oh,
they do.
absolutely.
They never leave.
Oh, good stuff. So I'll bring it home then with the last nomination. And there's a few on this list, but I thought, we Mel, me and you mentioned this one before we started recording, and it's one that I think we've both done separate videos on, and it's one that we both love a lot. And I think Dragon Force is one that you kind of have to talk about, and it's a game that isn't completely exclusive to the Sega Saturn, but I maintain that it's exclusive in the West since it's only the Sega Saturn version that got a working designs English translation, and the PS2 version, in my opinion, looks like hot garbage. But what can you say about Dragon Force? I first noticed this game on a demo disc, saw the rolling demo, and just seeing all these epic battles, with these, even though they were sprites, the art style and just the way it moved just instantly spoke to me. I saw that, I think it was on Sega Flash. It might have been Sega Flash Volume 5 or something. Immediately I was like, right, well, this is a game that I need to get, and ended up grabbing the PAL version. Uh, the fact that it starts off with this brilliant intro that really does set the scene. Well animated, really nicely stylized. The music in it at the intro screen, and then as you select your character, fantastic. And then just kind of the breadth of the game is quite quickly impressed upon you, because you have these 8 monarchs that you can choose from, albeit I think only 5 are playable at the start. And then it kind of does a little intro, because every single character, every single monarch that you choose to play as has a different story thread, which is astonishing, really. And then it dumps you in the game, and you're there in your single little. I think some kingdoms have 2 castles, 1 or 2 castles, and you look around the map, and there's all these different coloured flags. There's like these like rogue armies roaming around, like bandits and thieves and stuff. And then you just the scale at hand of you kind of taking over the continent to kind of unite the Dragon Force is really impressed upon you. You start off, and I think the game is paced so well, because you start off with these tiny little armies, and then you have these small skirmishes, and then it slowly expands as you get more generals, and you're able to expand your armies and get more troops to fight under you, until you get that mythical 100 versus 100 soldiers on score. It's 101 if you think you count the generals. Um, and it just is so engrossing, so engaging. It's a game back in the day. I played this to absolute death. I obviously played it through, unlocked the other generals or monarchs, and played through every single one of their campaigns. And when I was done with that, I did it all again. Um, because there's so many ways that you can play this, not just from a narrative perspective, because not only does the interactions and the story change, but the events change sequence as well, and you have to do different things and fight different enemies in different orders. And it's just astonishing that there's that much depth in the game. And then you top it off with an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack, and you with visuals. This is the Sega Saturn absolutely singing. You've got the VDP2 layer for the huge battlefields that you scroll all the way out. You've got all the character sprites on screen, and then you've got the parallax in the background. You can see, like, when you're indoors, you've got the pillars that scroll along the background, or you've got like the wilderness when you're out in the field. And then you've got the special effects. There's some transparencies in some of the attacks. You've got like the huge meteor showers. It's just, there's so much that's epic about that game. And it's not just great and epic to look at, and it's not just impeccably scored, but it's just so satisfying. And sometimes, yeah, if you can cheese your way, if you feel so inclined, and just steamroll enemies, although you will still come unstuck from now and again, even if you try to do that. But there's a real satisfaction in setting yourself up to be more efficient with your army, and grinding out a hard fought back victory against a bunch of enemy generals and their armies. It's so satisfying, and it's a feeling that I never really got tired of. And I was gutted that I sold my version back in the day towards the Dreamcast, because I was like, I've beat this game 16 times. I've put hundreds of hours into this. I really, really need to move it on. And I need this Dreamcast, I need something to trade towards it. And Dragon Force was one of the things that I sacrificed, along with a few others. And going back to it, once I got the ODE, just gave me all of those memories and feelings again. And it's a game that remains unique. There's nothing else quite like it, and the simplicity in the way that it gives you the commands and the controls of your army, but the depth of of how the strategy works. It's just one of the greatest games of its generation. And Mel, obviously, I'm going to come to you first because I know that this one is perhaps your favorite Sega Saturn game. Full stop.
I'm just going to interject here because I think to just put my own. I don't want you to come to me after you've went to Mel because
All right, we'll go to Mel after then. Mel can finish it off.
You two gentlemen are the Dragon Force connoisseurs. It's like it's a game that I have not put any real time into, shamefully, but both of your passion for this game makes me want to invest time in it. So I'm not going to try and fool viewers and listeners by trying to fudge my way through some fucking Wikipedia explanation of the game. I don't have enough experience with it to wax lyrical about it, but I know it means a lot to you two guys. So I will just hand the floor over to Mel because I know this is one of his all-time favourites.
We need to get you playing it, mate.
Yeah, we really do. and then I want to see a video about it on top of it. Dragon Force is the best Sega Saturn game, in my opinion. It's not even close. It's a game that, until it was re-released on the PlayStation 2, there was nothing like it. In my opinion, there is still nothing like it. It's one of those games that when a lot of people first see it, I think they mistake it for something that's complicated, something that may not be their cup of tea. It absolutely is not. It is exceptionally easy to play. It is easy to understand. All you have to do is give it 20 minutes. Kind of the mechanics play themselves for you, really, as far as understanding what you can and can't do. You don't have to play too many battles to really come to terms what you're supposed to do in this game. What makes it so good is everything that you can do in this game. And you can play it any way you want to. You can play it as a pure power trip, where you start out just run amok, conquering castles, get a whole dragon army, all your generals are 100 dragons, go in, shit all over the, the computer, and yay, I beat Dragon Force. And you would be doing yourself an incredible disservice to play it just like that, at least in your subsequent play sessions, because you can play Dragon Force any way you want. Not only can you choose a different monarch that gives you a different power set for that monarch, it puts you on a different place on the map, strategically affecting who's actually attacking you, how many castles you have, how safe you are. There's a few monarchs in this game that are kind of smack dab in the middle of the map, and man, they are just getting it from left, right, and center, having to defend themselves. So then you have the armies that are initially available to you. Sometimes you'll get stuck with just soldiers. Sometimes you'll get stuck with some cavalry. Sometimes you get stuck with just mages. And you kind of come to realize that, you can choose to use any army you want. You're not just stuck with what you start with, but you can also play with a certain army, sort of adding a theme to your playthrough. Hey, I'm going to play through it this time with just mages. Well, with mages, with some troop types, you're just going to run right over them. But then there's going to be other troop types where the battles are going to be exceptionally difficult. You control the difficulty of Dragon Force. A to Z, you control how hard that game is going to be. And I don't think there has ever been an RPG / strategy game that allowed you that much control completely over the setup, how you play it, what you use, how powerful your guys can get. I mean, entirely how you play that game is going to change your experience every single time. And it really does have that limitless replay value because of that. And I really do encourage anybody that has played it or hasn't played it, rather, if you've been scared to play it because you think role playing games aren't your type of game, if you just feel like you haven't had time, there's a save system. And if you have a cartridge, you can suspend it anytime you want. So if you get yourself into a situation where it's like, hey, I can only play this for 20 minutes, you can still suspend and save it fairly quickly in between, these play sessions. So it does give you a little bit of breathing room. Give this game a try. It is so incredibly good. And as Dan said, the PlayStation 2 port, it's serviceable, I guess, if that's the only thing that you have available to you. Honestly, compared to the Saturn version, it's not the way you want to play it. The Saturn is the definitive version of this game. How you want it to look, how you want it to sound, how you want it to play, the Saturn version's the way to go. And experiment with it. Use the different troop types. Just don't go after the strongest ones. Don't use the cheats that you see so many people use, where you pause and attack the people that are trying to escape. So you are immediately capturing everybody. Play the game. Play it yourself. Discover it yourself. Learn it yourself. Don't follow what other people are doing. And that game is going to give you hundreds of hours of gameplay. And frankly, outside of the scope of the Saturn, you can't name me a single game that blows Dragon Force away that entire generation. You can line up your Final Fantasy sevens, you can line up tactics, you can line up your Chrono Triggers from the previous generation. I don't give a damn what you put against it. Dragon Force is point blank one of the finest games in that role playing strategy genre that's ever been created. And frankly, it's still really a Saturn exclusive. So, that game, no, you couldn't play it anywhere else. So, people that say the Saturn doesn't have anything special, it doesn't have any exclusives that are worth going back to, man, BS. Dragon Force by itself puts that argument completely out, throws it away.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mel. Well, brilliantly said. Brilliantly said. It's funny that you mentioned Chrono Trigger, because, man, if Dragon Force was on the Super Nintendo or the PlayStation, it would be talked about in the same sort of breath as that sort of game.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal, and what you said about people need to approach it, and the best way to appreciate Dragon Force is to not read anything about Dragon Force apart from know that it's a great game, because if you start looking at how to win battles, then you're losing a lot of the appeal, because a lot of the satisfaction is from figuring out how you're going to deal with certain enemies when you've got certain troop types, especially in the early game. And then, yeah, being more efficient. And like you say, you can get to a point where you brute force your way. Let's just have a hundred dragons or 100 harpies, and blow the enemy away. And even that's not a foolproof, strategy from my own experience. But doing that just removes that layer of satisfaction from playing the game. And there really is nothing like it. There's nothing prescriptive about Dragon Force. You're plonked into this map, whatever monarch you choose. You're plonked onto the map with a single castle, and it's just like, yep, you choose where you want to go, what you want to take your army, what you want to conquer, how you want to shape your army, who you're going to recruit, what you're going to search, all of this stuff. And it's a sandbox basically. And it's just so good. And yeah, anyone that hasn't played it, James, really does need to.
I think I think the point we have to make is that by the time we come back to do Saturn Exclusives Part 2, the next time we speak, I have to be sitting here telling you guys, "Oh man, you were so right about Dragon Force." And it's a game. It's been on my radar, as I say, because Dan's obviously spoke to me about it so much, and obviously I've seen Mel your passion for it on the channel as well. But I have made sure I haven't went out and read any kind of guides or anything. The only kind of exposure to the kind of game I've had is through both of you guys. So it's one I definitely need to make a point of trying and not just trying it, but kind of committing to it, not just kind of, because it does, when I put it on and had a look at it, what you said there, Mel, about it can have this kind of preconception that it's hard or it's too deep or it's too complicated. But as you said, it's like it is actually more welcoming than it appears at a glance. So that's my promise to you guys. By the time we speak again, I will have played Dragon Force. So
yeah, I would absolutely love to hear what you think of it, playing it from the perspective of all these years later. Here's my opinion of whether or not it's any good. Does it hold up? Did it grab you the same way? I mean, I'm actually one of those people that love hearing those kinds of opinions anyway. I don't like arguing about game opinions because there's no point in that. Everybody's different. Everybody's going to have a different opinion. Telling somebody they're wrong because they like or don't like a game is like the dumbest thing ever. It's like, I kind of want to hear why you didn't like the game. That's interesting to me. But anyway, totally play Dragon Force, man. I really do think it's worth the effort.
Yep, totally agree. Well, that brings us around 3 games each, 9 Sega Saturn exclusives. What an amazing lineup they are. And yeah, as I say, you get 3 Sega Saturn super fans around, and that conversation is just going to go on. I mean, I think this is the longest podcast episode I think we might have done. So yeah, I had an idea that we'd do more than this. I mean, Mel, hopefully, I hope you'll be game for a part 2, and maybe even a part 3.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on, Mel.
cheers,
Really
Mel.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So viewers, listeners, hope you've enjoyed listening to us wax lyrical about these fantastic Sega Saturn exclusives. If would love to hear your own opinions, excuse me, on your favorite Sega Saturn exclusives, either in the comments on YouTube or via the SEGAGuys Discord or the Radio Sega Discord if you're listening in Radio Sega. If you're on YouTube, drop us a like or a subscribe because that really helps the channel. And if you want to be extra mega, think about becoming a member with a bunch of awesome perks from starting as little as 99p, such as getting your name read out in the credits right now.
Yep, certainly. Our premium members for this episode are G-Man, Stiff Peaks, I Am Mikowski, Craig Williamson, Resident SD, P-Wall, Tom Fum, Peter007, Andy Mackey, Nick Tullock, and of course our brothers at Sega Saturn, Shiro. Thank you very much to all our members and subscribers for your continued support. This week we blitzed past 8,000 subscribers, which in just under 2 years' time is insane to us. The target is to hopefully hit 10k by the end of the year. We're already well underway towards 9, so massive thank you to everybody who continues to support us, whether it's guys like Mel and Dave and the Saturn Shiro guys, pushing us on, people on X, the guys in the comments and member subscribers. Thank you so much. This journey has been insane fun so far, and we're just getting started. But Mel, thank you very much again, mate. Can't wait to do part 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Absolutely, man. We could keep this going for as long as we have the watchers.
Absolutely. Oh, thank you so much for coming on, Mel. We'll speak again soon. And for all our viewers and listeners, until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.
Sega.